Notre Dame fans, welcome back to the Irish Breakdown podcast. Here we are sitting here on Tuesday, February 4th. I'm joined by my guy, Trevor Trowbridge. I'm Brian Driscoll, and we are here talking about the Notre Dame defense. Trevor, you know, we had this conversation about the offense last week, and we had this conversation about, you know, looking ahead to the Notre Dame offense in 25 and things that have us excited and concerns that we have and things like that. And we're like, well, we can't really do the defense because we can't really have a conversation about the defense until we know who the defensive coordinator is going to be. And now we know. And so now we're going to talk about it. So what we're going to do today is we're going to look at several different aspects of the Notre Dame defense, and we'll kick things off with a conversation about just the importance of this defense to keep rolling. We'll dive into some reasons why we believe, at least for next season, no matter kind of honestly what happens at D coordinator, that they're have a shot to be as good, if not better. We'll dive into that. We'll talk about some potential breakout players, and then we'll have a mailbag. So if you want to get some mailbag questions in, go ahead and get those in now. We were going to start at 1:00, but somebody who I don't want to point fingers or name names forgot to set the show. So I go on there like 12:50. Was about 12:50 when I texted you, Trev. And I'm like, all right, let me get ready for the show. And I'm like, wow, I set it up and did not hit submit. So we didn't have a show published. And I was like, well, I can't do it now because people won't have time. So that's why we're getting started today. I'd like to come up with a really cool reason, like, hey, listen, you know, there was this happening in my neighborhood and I had to go out there and save the entire neighborhood and save burning buildings. It's because I'm an idiot. And so that's why we're getting a little bit started a little bit late today. But you know what, Trevor? Better late than never. And I'm very excited to talk about the Notre Dame defense.
I'm ready to dive into it today, man. I'm excited. It's a good conversation to have, especially now that we know who Notre Dame's defensive coordinator is going to be. But I'm with you. I hopped into Streamyard and nothing was popping up, and I logged out and logged back in like 3 times. I was like, oh, Brian's going to be so mad if I like forgot a password or
I'm logging the wrong site.
I was like, oh, and then I started second guessing myself. I was like, it's Streamyard, right? And I was like, that's I'm pretty sure. I only haven't done a show in a couple days, I feel like. But no, we're ready to rock and roll, man. I'm excited to jump into it today.
Yeah, you haven't done a show since Friday because we got the new the new RTCF show on Mondays, which is gives you a nice little way to kick off your week and get some work done, maybe spend some time with your wife and not have to worry about doing a show. Although you'll fill in for that show from time to time. I believe that. There's no doubt about that. So, Trevor, when we talk about the Notre Dame offense, I mean, really where the conversation has to start is really kind of looking at what the defense has been.
Yeah.
And you know, it's interesting when you look at the run that Notre Dame has been on defense, and Marcus Freeman gets a lot of credit for what we're seeing right now, but Notre Dame defensively has really been the Notre Dame defense has really been the driving force behind success for a long time. Obviously, 05-06 success was primarily driven by the offense. The defense was okay. Had some talented players, but that was an offensive-driven team. 02, that team was driven by a really good defense. Still think of the Jerome Sapp and Glenn Earl and Vontez Duff and Shane Walton, Courtney Watson, that defense. Back in 02, you think about Cedric. You had Daryl Campbell. What was Big Cedric's name? I'm trying to remember. Daryl Campbell was the one. I cannot believe I remember his name. First name, but I'm drawing a blank on Notre Dame's big defensive tackle that they had there. I know people in the chat are going to help me remember that one, but anyway, had a great defense that year. You look at like the 2010 to 2012 success that Notre Dame did have. The defense drove it. The offense finally steps up a little bit in 2012, and then all of a sudden Notre Dame goes 12-0 because the defense is elite. Bob Diaco built some really good defenses at Notre Dame. You had the disaster that was the era of Brian Van Gorder, which is just an absolute train wreck. And then you get into it turns around. You bring in Mike Elko and Clark Lee in 2017. Mike Elko gets that foundation started. Clark Lee builds on it. Your defense is a big reason why you're successful in 18. Obviously, the 2015 success was built on a great offense and then a talented defense that overcame bad coaching. But in those big games, I mean, you couldn't make stops early against Clemson. You couldn't make stops against Stanford. You couldn't make stops against Ohio State with that defense. 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, a big reason for the team's success was defense. And there were some ups and downs in those years. 21 started off with a little bit of a rough transition under Marcus Freeman, but by the end of the year, that defense was outstanding. And you just look back at this football team, and you know what it has been. It's been really good on defense, but over the last 2 years, we've really seen it jump to a whole nother level, Trevor. I mean, you look at the success that Clark Lee had. You know, him and Mike Elko show up in 2017. Mike Elko running the defense. Clark Lee is the linebackers coach. They go from 27.8 points per game all the way down to 21.5. Clark Lee takes over in 2018. They give up 18 points a game. They give up 17-9 the next year. They give up 19-7 the next year during the COVID playoff year. They give up 19-7 in 2021. You go up to 23 in the first year of Al Golden. And as we've talked about, part of that was you gave up four touchdowns that year on offense or defense. You gave up, so they'd have been around 21. And then 23, they dropped down to 15.9. In this past season, they dropped down to 15.5, despite playing 4 playoff games where you're playing the best of the best. They hold teams to 15.5 points per game, and the defense has really just risen to a whole new level. And it's very important. Marcus Freeman, obviously, as the head coach, gets a lot of that credit. Al Golden, being the architect of that defense, gets a lot of credit. He had a great coaching staff around him. You have the best secondary coach in college football in Mike Mickens. You know, Marcus Freeman, I think, made a great hire at linebacker, you know, bringing in Max Bulla, who I think has done a really good job as a teacher. And you know, I know Al Washington's kind of a love him or hate him kind of assistant coach, man. But you think about all the injuries that Notre Dame dealt with. You know, everybody loves to praise Joe Rudolph for the job he did with the offensive line last year. And I'm kind of like, yeah, he did a nice job last year. Sometimes those injuries led to him being forced to overcome maybe mistakes he made with personnel. But like, you give him credit for the things that he did. What he went through is nothing compared to what Al Washington went through with injuries last year. You know, losing Jordan Patel in game 3, then losing Boubacar in game 5, then Howard goes down for a quarter of the season. Then as soon as he comes back, Riley goes down. You have Jason Onye kind of getting booted off the team early in the season. I mean, it just Josh Burnham misses time with injuries, and to still have that line play the way that it did is a really, really good coaching job. So you've seen a lot of growth here. The recruiting has gotten better. And now you're entering another period of uncertainty with the defense in certain ways, in a lot of ways, because you've got a new coordinator. Al Golden is gone. You had some big personnel losses in Riley Mills and Howard Cross and R.J. Oben and Jack Kaiser and Benjamin Morrison and Xavier Watts. I mean, you had at least one all-time Notre Dame great players leaving your defense. And now you're in a situation where the unit that has been sort of the backbone for the majority of your success the last 20 years, with a couple of exceptions, now enters a period of uncertainty. Not uncertainty of is it going to be good or bad, or it's an unknown because you now have a new defensive coordinator. So when you look at it, Trev, it's one of those things where this is a football team that has been driven by defensive success. And we expect, you and I have talked about this, we expect this team to be even better this upcoming season in certain ways. But the reality is this: no matter what you think about in the offense, that we think the offense is going to be a lot better this year. But no matter what you think of how good the offense is, the reality is your defense has to remain great, because defense is where consistency comes from. And you and I were chatting before the show about, looking back at some of these great teams that won with big time offenses and how they'd have these games where the offense doesn't show up. But you look at the 2022 and 2021 Georgia team, and they scored a lot of points, but there were plenty of weeks where the offense didn't show up and the defense bailed them out. You think of the Kentucky game in 2022. You think of the win over Clemson in 2021 that started this whole thing for Georgia, where they beat Clemson, who was coming off of a playoff berth, 10-3, and didn't score an offensive touchdown in that 10-3 win. And there's going to be weeks where your offense doesn't show up. Consistency comes from defense. And the point you made, Trevor, which is the example you made, was phenomenal. Oregon wins with offense. But every time their offense has a rough day, they get beat. And a perfect example is the Ohio State game. And anytime they're playing a team that's even remotely good, if their offense has an off day, You get in the Ohio State game in the playoff, and Evan Stewart's hurt, the running back goes down, and they can't score 40 points or 30-plus points, and all of a sudden, look what happens. They get rolled because their defense isn't good enough. They got talent, but it's still not a great defense. And the concern that I have for Notre Dame, and this isn't a concern as in like it's an issue, but a concern as far as how the program always has to be, just in theory, is you have to remain an elite defense, or at least an outstanding defense, because that is how you become slump-proof. That is how you maintain a level of consistency from week to week to week and season to season, knowing that, hey, our offense doesn't have to be elite every week, but then when it is, it makes you so much more dangerous. Because as I've always said, man, defense is going to get you to the show. Offense is going to be what wins it. And that's exactly what happened this year, right? Notre Dame rode its defense all the way to the title game. And then the offense needed to step up in the title game because the defense was having an off day and the offense wasn't good enough to get it done. So the offense clearly has to get better as well. But you've got to be able to score to a level to get to in the championship. But to get there, you have to be able to play defense. And it's not a surprise that the 4 semifinal teams were arguably the 4 best defenses in college football last year. Arguably. You can make a case about this team or that team, but you're definitely going to include Ohio State, Notre Dame, Texas, and Penn State in that group of teams that are in the discussion for who had the best, the 5 best defenses in college football last season. And if you look at the FEI ratings, Trevor, that's the Fremeau Efficiency Index, and you look at where he had, I mean, the teams that were in the title game, he had Notre Dame and Ohio State 1-2. It's not a coincidence. And everybody talked about Ohio State's, how good their offense was, but their defense is why they were in the title. But here's who the FEI had as their top 4 defenses last year. This is efficiency, so it takes into consideration, things like, who you played and rankings and all that kind of stuff to try to give some level of, context to how good you are. And they had Notre Dame 1, Ohio State 2, Texas 3, Penn State 4. Not a coincidence at all when you look at that. And then if you look at the at ESPN's power rankings, Texas 1, the Football Power Index, Texas 1, Notre Dame 2, Ohio State 3, Tennessee was 4. They have Penn State 7. They had I kind of laugh at the FPI one because they had Alabama 6. Like you can't give me Alabama's defense being the 6th best defense in the country. We watched something completely different than what you watched. The point is, 4 best defensive teams in college football last year made the playoff. Who played for the championship? In my opinion, the 2 best offenses. Who won the championship? The team with the better offense. Right? So offense matters, but to get to that point, your defense has to remain elite. Especially when you look at some of the upcoming schedules Notre Dame's going to be facing the next couple of years. Because let's be honest, y'all know my opinion on the Chris Ash hire. We're going to have to look at the statistics of what he does a little differently in the next 3 seasons than we did the last 2, because the reality is, if things stay the same of what they are now, the offensive schedule is going to be better the next couple of years than what it has been the last couple of years. So 17 points a game may be similar to 15.5, depending on the context of the opponents, but it has to remain an outstanding defense. So that long-winded kind of intro lays the groundwork for what we're going to discuss, because no matter what you think of how the offense is going to be the next few years, Trev, and we think it could end up being really good, to get back to that stage, your defense has to maintain, if not even get better, moving forward. That's the task that's in front of Chris Ash, Mike Mickens, Max Bulla, Al Washington, and of course, most importantly, Marcus Freeman.
Look, everybody wants to go and dive into, what does a team have to have in order to win a national championship? And the easiest answer is, well, they have to have an elite receiving core, because Devontae Smith has a Heisman and a national championship ring. And LSU with Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson won all that. And it's like, yes, that's true, but Georgia never had that in 21 and 22. Like, they had really good receivers, but they didn't have that, right?
Their best pass catcher was a tight end.
Right. Michigan didn't have that, but what they had, what all of the teams outside of LSU 2019 being the outlier, is they all had fantastic defenses. They all had great defenses. Ohio State in 24, great defense. Michigan 23, great defense. Georgia 21, 22, great defenses. Alabama in 2020, yes, Mac Jones had a great year. Devontae Smith had a great year. Yes, their offense was putting up 38, 40 points a game. Their defense was still holding people to like 15, right? So it's not like they were putting up 45 points a game in the way that LSU's defense or LSU's team was, right? LSU was putting up 45 points a game because there was a good chance their defense was going to allow like 27, 28, and so defense is what's going to have to get you there. Everybody always wonders why Notre Dame is always in the championship discussion. I'm sure people in the chat have heard it. I know Bryan and I have heard it. It's like, well, Notre Dame, what have they done? They're always in the conversation around national championships and title contenders. It's like, well, it's because they were 87-18 overall since 2017. And you go through and look at that, and the driving force was the defense.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Teams don't go 87-18 if their defense is meh. And if they do that, they had an insane run of high-powered offense. From 17 to last year in 2024, Notre Dame had a really, really good offense 2-3 of those years, maybe, and so you go through and you dive into what the defensive side of the ball means. Like that's Notre Dame's ticket. To Brian's point, they're going to be playing more high-powered offenses in this upcoming schedule, right? But 17 points a game, if the offense is what we believe them to be, 17 points we could still look at that and say, well, they're basically still giving up 15, right? Because now instead of the defense holding to 15 and the offense scoring 30, maybe the defense is holding to 17 and the offense is scoring 35, 38. So it's all within like relativity to each other. And that's what's going to be interesting about this defense. And the question that we're going to talk about today is, can they? Can they? And we believe that they can for a long list of reasons. So fact of the matter is, defense has to remain where it's at for Notre Dame to not fall into the 2018 to 2019, right? The 2012 to 2013, the 2015 to 2016. There's going to be a lot of adjustments that are going to have to be made, but they have the pieces in place where the continuity is going to be strong, in my opinion, Bryan.
Yeah, there's no question, Trevor. I mean, you look at teams that have at times been really good, like had those great offenses you mentioned, LSU. And my question is always, that was a great run. I would take that run in a heartbeat at Notre Dame. I would take a 16-0 season with an offense that scores almost 50 points a game. But that's fun as a fan. But if we're talking about building a program that's consistent, what did LSU do before and after that? And why? Because what had happened with LSU is they had taken a step back in regard to their ability to play defense. Early in the 2010s, their defense was the driving force behind a lot of their success. Their defense stopped being as good. And, their defense was almost identical in 2018 as it was 2019. It was okay. It was like 21 points a game, around 335 to 345 yards per game. One year they go, 10 and, or 15-0. And then the other year they're kind of a disappointing, 10-3 team that nobody really loves. They go 10-3. They lose to Texas A&M. They get blown out by Alabama. They lose to Florida. They don't really have any good wins that year. I don't think anybody they beat ended the season ranked, and you beat UCF in a bowl game. And then in 2020, your defense takes a big step back and you go 5-5. And then you've got that great year in between. But you had that one great offensive year, but consistency comes from being able to play defense. And I'll give Ryan Day a lot of credit because they went through a stretch at Ohio State where they were really taking a step back on defense, sort of the end of the Urban Meyer era. And that's why Urban Meyer recommended a guy. Urban Meyer made a lot of bad decisions when it came to hiring defensive coordinators in Ohio State. A lot of bad decisions. And, but they were kind of taking a step back. And I give Ryan Day a lot of credit, and I did it at the time, of going out and hiring Jim Knowles, knowing it would take him a couple years to kind of get that thing turned around. And it did. They started getting really good on defense last year. But he knew we can't go out there and win playoff games 42-41. We can't be giving up 40-some points to Michigan. We can't be doing this. We can't be doing that. And if we're going to consistently compete for championships, he understood that. And that's a big thing is Ohio State's offense. This is one of the least effective offensive stretches they've had over a 2-year period. I mean, they've averaged about 33 to 34 points a game the last 2 years. That's it. They were at 35 this year. They were just under 31 last year. But yet they went 11-2 last year, 14-2 this year, won a national championship. Why? Because their defense became elite. And now they're going to have to struggle with the way Notre Dame is of can they keep it going? But that's the reality of it, Trevor, is Notre Dame, in order to be a consistent winner, has to make sure that they take no steps back on defense. That's the foundation that needs to be established. Now, let's get specific about this defense, Trevor, because here's the question in front of Notre Dame. A lot of what became the foundation of the success the last 2 years is now gone. The architect of the defense is gone, and Al Golden. And I don't mean that as any disrespect to Marcus Freeman, like he had no hand in it. Marcus Freeman's job was to hire an excellent defensive coordinator, and he did that. And that's what he's paid to do. He wasn't in there installing game plans every week and all that. That doesn't mean he couldn't if he wanted to. And Marcus Freeman's a great defensive mind, but he wants to be the head coach. And that's why he makes the hires he does. And he made a great hire in Al Golden. And Al Golden was the architect of what they did. And he's gone. You're basically your best player of the Marcus Freeman era, with all due respect to Joe Alt and all those other. I mean, your best player for the last 3 years has been Xavier Watts. You know, and just the job he's done as a leader, as a playmaker, as just a consistent force on that defense. And I don't think people appreciate how good of a job he had to do this year as a leader, because he was surrounded for most of the year with young guys. He had a true sophomore safety, a true sophomore corner, and a true freshman cornerback playing around him for over half the season. And was able to kind of keep that group going, partly because they have talent, good coaching with Mike Mickens, but great leadership with Xavier Watts as well. And Jordan Clark. I give him a lot of credit for that as well. And Rod Hurd did some good things, but that was Xavier Watts' unit. He's gone. You had an outstanding defensive tackle duo the last 2 years. Now, at times this year, it wasn't as good as you hoped it would be. But the fact is the reason the defense took a step back when Mills and Cross were down is because they didn't have a Mills or Cross ready to step in and play to their level. There was no Leonard Moore at defensive tackle when Riley Mills went down. That doesn't mean Gabriel Rubio didn't do some good things, because I would argue the Georgia game was the best game Gabriel Rubio's ever played. I mean, he was outstanding in that game. But he's not at the point yet where he could then do that against Penn State and then do that against Ohio State. He wasn't bad in either one of those games, but he couldn't beat Riley Mills, where Leonard Moore stepped in for Benjamin Morrison, was like, yeah, I'm that dude as well. You know, Donovan Heinisch did a great job late in the regular season filling in for Howard Cross when he went down and was outstanding in that from a production standpoint. But then as the competition ramped up, he wasn't quite as impactful as he was, which is not a knock on him. It's just that's what happens when you play better teams. And so you didn't have sort of that interior defensive next in line to step in and just replace it, which then moving forward is a question mark about, are you going to be able to be as good there? You lose those guys. Jack Kaiser just dominated the Senior Bowl. I think he was one of the most underappreciated members of the defense the last 2 seasons. 2022, I thought Jack was very up and down with his play. He was pretty darn good last year, Trev. You and I talked about it preseason about his per snap production related to what it was with J.D. Bertrand and Maris Leofau, who we all, most of us agree were pretty good players in 2023, but Jack's production was really outstanding. He comes out this year. He has 55 solo tackles, which was 10 more than what JD ever had or in the 2 years under Al Golden. Now, again, he played a lot more games, but it's still a really outstanding season that he had. Ends up with 90 tackles. He does a great job for this defense. He also has 5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, 2 forced fumbles. He had a number of clutch plays. He was a very key part of that defense. You're losing Jordan Clark, who is a really good football player for you. I don't count him as much because I'm trying to focus more on the guys that have been a part of the last 2 great defenses. Benjamin Morrison is gone. Now, I know Leonard Moore did a great job stepping in, but now Leonard has a different task Now you're the guy. Now you are the guy that everybody's looking to now. Your role's different as opposed to the freshman that you just hope he does well. And now it's like, okay, now you're a preseason All-American. Everybody thinks you're going to be the guy. There's a different level of pressure on you. You got to handle that. But the reality is the guys that were the big drivers of that turnaround, Golden, Watts, Morrison, Mills, Cross, Kaiser, Bertrand, Leofau, those guys are all gone. And now there's a true changing of the guard that's unlike what we've seen in past years, where in past years you'd lose a guy and there's some senior or fifth-year guy ready to take over that mantle. That's not true of this defense. Their defense is going to be driven by juniors and younger for the most part. And so it's a very different transition than what we've seen in the past. And so the question is, can they keep this going with the players that they lost, with the coaching that they lost? The big question now remains, with all of that hitting in one offseason, can Marcus Freeman push the right buttons to make sure this thing keeps going and that they have an outstanding defense? Even if they take a small step back, as long as it's small, that's fine. I can live with that. But you've got to still be in that top 10, borderline top 5 defense for next season. And we'll get into some of the reasons why, but that's the challenge that sits in front of. We're going to go over some reasons for optimism and why we think actually they will. But that's the challenge. That's the question. We can tell you what we think is going to happen, but that's what has to happen, is this defense has to continue to play at that level despite those personnel losses. Now, Notre Dame's not alone, Trevor, because this conversation would be even uglier if we were talking about all the losses that Ohio State had.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So they're not alone. They're not the only team going through that, but we're just talking about Notre Dame right now. And so them continuing their team success is going to require them to have to replace some pretty important parts of this defense, and that's really what makes this task even more challenging.
Yeah, the biggest question that I have, Brian, it kind of goes down to 3 different people, and it's no disrespect to Jordan Clark or Ben Morrison or Jack Kaiser or any of the other pieces that have been a part of this defensive turnaround. But you kind of go back through and you look at when Notre Dame's defense had a big game coming up, right? Or we would talk about it in Keys to Victory. There's always 3 people that we mentioned ad nauseum almost every single week, and it was Al Golden, Xavier Watts, and Riley Mills. And those were the 3 guys that it was always like, all right, when you relied on somebody to have a big play, I can't tell you how many times you and I were sitting in Keys to Victory. And when I was just getting started, me, you, and Ryan would sit in Keys to Victory, and it was always, this just feels like a Xavier Watts game. You know what I mean? Like, it feels like he's going to get a big game-changing play, like which he did.
Trevor, we would sit here and say, we would talk to ourselves and bring up, hey, let's go this direction this game, because I felt like it was getting to the point where, like, are we being lazy by just talking about Xavier Watts every week? But it was almost kind of like, how do you not?
Right. It was always funny going through Keys to Victory, and on offense it was, look for this and look for these post-snap switches and look for this. And then on defense, it was like, Al Golden's going to have to draw up a good game plan, and Riley Mills is going to have to do what he did for the last 5 games, and Xavier Watts is going to have to be Xavier Watts. like literally, that was all of that was a lot of our conversation. And to me, those are the big questions, right? Obviously, it starts up top with Chris Ash, and it's like, look, nobody's asking you to be Al Golden. People are asking you to be the best version of yourself, which is what people got to see when you were at Ohio State, right? I have my feelings about it too. But at the end of the day, I'm not on the Notre Dame staff. I have no hand in that matter. So the situation is what it is. And so now I'm to the point where we got to see the best version of Chris Ash. I know you're in the same boat, right? Regardless of the feelings about it, he is Notre Dame's defensive coordinator for the 2025 season. And so we are going to have to hope that he, along with Marcus Freeman, continue to hold that line and hold that standard of, hey, this is what the defense is, right? For Xavier Watts, it is now somebody on the defense is going to have to step up and be the guy of who's going to be the next Xavier Watts that we're talking about. Not in terms of, all right, man, we have to find the next safety that's going to have 13 interceptions in 2025 and 2026. But it's who's going to be that guy.
Who's the playmaker that steps up when the game is on the line? And that's really what made Riley Mills and Xavier Watts both so good last year. Riley was really good in 2023, but he was a different type of good. This year, it seems like whenever they needed a sack, whenever they needed a stop, whenever they needed a play by a lineman, it seemed like Riley was that guy. When they needed a turnover, when they needed a tackle, when they needed a big play on defense, Xavier was that guy. Like Xavier's 13 interceptions were not hollow interceptions that he was getting it like late into the second half. They were like clutch situations, game on the line, put a game away or stop a drive, that type of thing where they mattered. And I'd rather have a guy that has 5 impactful turnovers than a guy that has 10 where 7 or 8 of them are either end of half situation, Hail Marys, 3rd and 10 bombs that, like it just, you want those turnovers to be impactful. And that's what made Xavier so special. And Riley was almost kind of like, I don't know that I'd necessarily say he was quite in the same boat, but I would say he was the closest thing I've seen since Khalid Kareem. And I've always talked about how much I loved Khalid Kareem in 2018 because he was not their best defensive player that year. He was part of a great defense. But the thing I loved about Khalid is if you were in the fourth quarter or it was 3rd down and you're like, somebody's got to step up and make a play, you're kind of like, okay, watch 53 on this play because I have a feeling he's going to step up and make a play.
Right.
I mean, this is kind of how he was. You need those money players. And for those guys this year, for the most part, now early in the season, it was Christian Gray was a big part of that, and late in the season, Leonard Moore became that with the forced fumble against Louisville and some of the plays he made. But you lost 2 of those guys. And I would argue that at times you lost 3 because Jack Kaiser had some pretty clutch plays this year as well. So that's a big part of it. It's not just losing talent and you replace talent with talent. To your point, Trevor, is you're not just losing talented players that produced numbers. You're losing guys that knew how to make winning plays. You can have a guy that's got 15 tackles on a losing team. Can you make the plays where, okay, I only had 7 tackles, but they were huge moments? And that's the thing that they're going to have to replace. Al Golden seemed to be really good at knowing what to dial up when the game was on the line. He struggled to get pressure against USC all game, but when he needed to dial up that pressure on that drive where it was 35-28, they're driving. He dials up that pressure. Jack Kaiser comes free, gets in the quarterback's face. He rushes a back shoulder throw. Christian picks it off, takes it back to the house.
Yep.
I mean, that was sort of that thing where you say, boy, that was a big time play. And that's what you're losing. And here's the thing I'll say about Chris Ash, Trevor. We said our piece in the first show. We don't need to have to keep reminding people of everybody knows where we stand. Here's the one, and there's a lot of Notre Dame fans not happy about this hire. But here's the thing that I believe 99% of Notre Dame fans can agree on. Now, there's that 1% of Notre Dame fans that literally, and it may be even bigger than this, but I'll say 1%, that would rather be right than for Notre Dame to have success. So if they don't think a guy's a good hire, they don't like Marcus Freeman or they don't like whatever, they would rather root for them to fail so they can be right. The vast majority of Notre Dame fans are not that way. We've all said our opinion on what we think of Chris Ash. A lot of us don't like that hire. A lot of us in this chat don't like that hire. But we all hope that we're wrong. We all hope that this is a home run for Marcus Freeman. And I hope that we're sitting here in 2 to 3 years having that same conversation about Al Golden. Now, again, it's different. My concerns with Al Golden were just about coordinating experience. It was not that I didn't think he was a very good coach.
Right.
With Chris Ash, I have questions if he's a championship caliber defensive coordinator. Well, he's got a championship. They didn't win that year because of their defense. They gave up 22 points a game. Notre Dame's not winning the national championship next year if they give up 22 points a game. They're not. So, but we hope he's right. He's right because he needs to be right. This hire needs to be the right one because, well, for a lot of reasons, but we'll focus on that one. And that's what's going to be a key is if Marcus Freeman is correct on how good this hire is. Part of the reason I have optimism is I can't change my opinion just because I have faith in Marcus Freeman. I have to give people an honest opinion of what I know and what I see.
Sure.
But the reason that I'm less woe is us is because I do have a level of faith in Marcus Freeman defensively to make decisions. There's a level of trust I have. I'm going to tell you all what I think and what I know about a hire, a coach, or a scheme or whatever, but you have to think like this is his baby. Defense is his baby. I have to think that this was more than just Urban Meyer recommending him to him.
Right.
And he says, "Oh, okay, Urban, let's roll." I have to think that he did his due diligence and felt like this was the right hire. And that's why there's a level of optimism for me still, even though I have my feelings about Chris Ash, because like I'm more willing to stick to my guns on an offensive hire. Because Marcus Freeman's made very clear, I'm not an offensive guy. He's still young. He doesn't have that 30, 40 years of experience that guys like Nick Saban have, where you can kind of like, yeah, they're making great hires on both sides of the ball. And we've seen him, I mean, a lot of his shaky hires have been on offense, OC, receiver, things like that. But when it comes to defense, you got to be like, his track record's pretty good. He's the guy that saw how good Chris O'Leary was. Remember, it was Marcus Freeman's suggestion to Brian Kelly to promote Chris O'Leary to full time. And he turned out to be not a great recruiter, but a heck of a head of a defensive backs coach. He's the guy that obviously brought Mike Mickens over to Cincinnati. And then that led to him coming to Notre Dame. He obviously made the Al Washington hire. He's the one that when James Laurinaitis left, really liked the idea of promoting Max Bulla. And he brought in Max Bulla in the role that he had as a GA. And then, of course, the Al Golden hire, which we had question marks about because of, he hadn't coached the defense in almost 20 years, and he'd been in the NFL for a long time, et cetera, et cetera. Those were the concerns there. I always knew he was a great coach, and I thought he'd be a better recruiter. Actually, the thing I was wrong about on Al Golden is he wasn't a great recruiter. He had been a long time ago, but I think he was kind of like, yeah, I'm kind of over that, and I'll just do the closing. But it ended up being a home run hire.
Yeah.
Even though there were some question marks about it from people that like study the game and the people that aren't just like blindly supporting whatever the coach does. But he got it right. He nailed it. And now you hope that he's done that again. And if he has done that again, then my optimism about what's going to happen grows exponentially. And we'll talk about those reasons why in the next segment. But that's a big part of this is all going to come down to, did he make the right decision at defensive coordinator? And if he nailed it, and we hope that he did, then I don't think this is really going to be that big of a question mark. If he doesn't nail it, then you run the risk of taking a step back. And then the question becomes, how quickly does he recognize that he didn't make the right hire and make a change? When he did that pretty quickly on offense, can he, receiver and OC, depending on what you think may have happened with the offensive coordinator position. My belief is that Marcus Freeman did not force Jared Parker out, but that Jared Parker knew that there were going to be some changes and it might be good for you to pursue other opportunities.
Sure.
Meaning Marcus Freeman was very clearly not happy with how the offense was going, recognized it pretty quickly despite the numbers looking good, and he made a quick change, and then that next change is a home run. So either A, he nails this one, or B, if he doesn't, he quickly recognizes it and says, I'm going to make a change. He's shown a tendency to do that. Our hope is that he doesn't have to. The hope is that this is the hire. Yeah. That's the home run. And if it is, then this thing is just it's going to be like a well-oiled machine, dude. It's just going to keep on rolling, in my opinion.
And another thing, too, one thing, and I'm going to put this disclaimer out here now, and Brian, I know you and I understand this, but this is just kind of for ND Nation as a whole. It's going to look different, right? You can't expect Chris Ash to come in and be Al Golden. Right? There's going to be different players. Like we mentioned, there's not going to be a Riley Mills on the field. There's not going to be a Xavier Watts on the field. Luckily, one of the reasons why I didn't mention Jack Kaiser, who had a lot of great plays throughout 2024 and was a key role into them making the national championship. One of the reasons why I didn't mention Ben Morrison is we kind of already saw like the passing of the torch throughout the season. Obviously more so with Ben Morrison because literally he was not able to play. But you saw guys start to come on that weren't starters, right? You saw guys like a Jaden Ausberry start to come on and guys like a Kingston come on. And then with Morrison's injury, you saw Leonard Moore come on. You started to hear good things about Carson Hobbs and how good postseason practice was going for him. So safety is one of those where they're going to have to, and it doesn't have to come at safety. Wouldn't be upset if they did. I mean, they have a guy in Adon Schuler that just got 16 games of on-the-field tutelage from Xavier Watts, right? That's got to mean something. Oh, and he's a really, really good athlete.
And he was known as a high IQ. I mean, Don Schuler was a National Honor Society kid. He was always known as a smart football player. The questions about him coming out of high school were more about what kind of athlete is he.
Mm-hmm.
I think he kind of answered those. The football smarts was never the question. And then, when, like you said, Trev, when he gets to spend an entire 2 whole years, one of them as part of the room that's not playing, and then the next, that's my partner in crime.
Yeah.
You know, that's my guy. I mean, that's so incredibly invaluable. You've talked about that multiple times this offseason, and I don't think that can I don't think you can overstate how important it is for a guy like a Don to get to spend that kind of time learning from someone like Xavier Watts. Because Xavier was not an elite athlete either, but he was an elite mind, and he was a good athlete. And that's how Don is. And I think you could not have, like, not saying that Kyle Hamilton or Harrison Smith or Alohi Gilman wouldn't have been great leaders either, although he probably better. But like Harrison Smith can't teach someone to be 6'2", 215 and really fast. Kyle Hamilton can't teach someone to be 6'4". Xavier Watts can teach what makes him great to a degree.
Yeah.
And I think that translates very well.
I think it's going to be interesting to see what the defense is going to look like. And we're going to have a better idea once we're able to get out and see spring practices. Obviously, the blue gold game was just announced. I can't believe it's already in 67 days. You know, it's just a little over 2 months away, which I think is absolutely crazy. But you know, all of these things are going to be question marks that we're going to kind of find out along with everybody else. We're along for the ride too. But there are a lot of reasons why we believe that this is going to be something that's really, really positive. Right? The defense has a lot of different tools to come back and be as dominant as they were, and they have the opportunity to be better than what they were. Yeah, I know it sounds crazy to say now, but there's a lot of the conversation after the 2023 season. You know, man, wouldn't it be so great if their defense ended up somehow better? It's like, well, they lost Cam Hart, and Marist, and JD, and you know, they lost a couple edge rushers and Javonte Jean-Baptiste. So, you know, we'll see. They got the pieces to do it, but we'll see. And then they were, right? But we're getting ready to dive into our reasons for optimism here. And there's a lot of them, right? But listen, guys, before we do, be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this podcast with your friends and family, whichever platform you watch us on. Please be sure to leave us a 5-star review. We'd greatly appreciate it. And the best way to support what we're doing here and the conversations that we have here every day when we go live are happening currently on the boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com.
So I think, Trevor, we kind of talked about this as sort of the end of the show or end of the segment one is we're going to talk about what are the reasons that we believe that there should be a great deal of confidence, at least for this next season, the Notre Dame defense should remain really, really good. And that number one is Marcus Freeman's presence and Marcus Freeman's impact on the program. And this is a holistic way of looking at it. Number one is the mentality. As long as he stays who he is, the program will stay what it is. You know, he is someone who does have a great defensive mind. That's why he is at Notre Dame. It's why he's the head coach now. It was for the job he did as the defensive coordinator. I mean, Marcus Freeman has played Georgia twice, and it was from 2020 to 2024 as defensive coordinator. The first time I think they held him to 24 points. The second time, and that's when he had Cincinnati's players. The second time they held him to 10. You know, I mean, this is a guy that has a great defensive mind. There's no doubt about it. So there's that. You look at the impact he's had on the program from a recruiting standpoint, and that leads me to number two. The big reason why I think this defense is going to keep rolling, at least for this year, is, look, you had a lot of talent that you lost. We talked about it. Xavier Watts and Riley Mills and Howard Cross and Jack Kaiser and Jordan Clark and Benjamin Morrison and guys like that. But, man, when you look at it, there's still a lot of talent coming back. And this is the side of the ball where when you talk about reasons for optimism, Marcus Freeman, this is what we're talking about. It's, okay, whatever you think about the hire he made, we're going to find out. We don't know. One thing we do know is they've recruited this side of the ball really, really well in recent seasons. And all those players are now going into his first defensive class is actually going into their senior season. It's the Josh Burnhams, the Jalen Sneeds, the the guys that are still left from that class. Some of it's gone. Jaden Mickey transferred. Benjamin's going pro. Jaden Bellamy's gone. Nolan Ziegler's gone. Tyson Ford's gone. Aiden Gobira's gone. So a lot of that class is gone. But what's coming back is going to be a foundational piece of this defense. Josh Burnham, Junior Tuilamaka, Jalen Sneed, that group of players. His first full class as head coach are now going into their junior seasons, and that is still arguably the best recruiting class Notre Dame has had in recent years. It's debatable because the 24 one was really flipping good as well. But you talk about the Drake Bowen, you talk about Jaden Ausberry, you talk about Christian Gray and just Don Schuler and just the talent that they landed in that class is real. Boubacar Traore, Armel Mukam. There's a lot of talent. Some of it's made an impact already. Some of it hasn't. Like, Armel Mukam hasn't made an impact yet. Preston Zenner hasn't made an impact yet. But still talented players. There have been a lot of years in the past, including years where Notre Dame was really good, where Preston Zenner is a starter for you and you're like, he's a good football player. Now he can't get on the field because of how loaded you are. That's when you're recruiting at a high level. Like, you look at Preston Zenner, you're telling me that guy wouldn't have started over Joe Schmidt? You're telling me that guy wouldn't have started over Drew White, with all due respect to Drew? You tell me that guy wouldn't have started over Dan Fox? He absolutely would have. But on this team, he can't get on the field. Why? Because they've recruited this defense so well. And then you've got the 24 classes now going into year. Now Kingston gets a whole year under his belt. Bryce Young gets a year under his belt. Bronte Johnson, Kennedy Urlacher, Leonard Moore. This group now gets another year, and then you're bringing in Chris Burgess. You're bringing in Madden Faramo. You're bringing in Dallas Golden, Mark Zachary, Jadon Blair, Cree Thomas, Brandon Logan. And you're just like, dude, if you can't coach this defense up, you're in the wrong line of work. I mean, if you can't coach this group of players into and I'm not even talking about the transfer guys. We're talking about what they have recruited since Marcus Freeman has been here. If you can't coach this into a top 10 defense, you got to find out something else to do with your life, because this coaching thing just ain't for you. Yeah. And that's the biggest thing for me, Trev, more than anything is Chris Ash is walking into it. Does he have a Joey Bosa? No. But he's not going to look around that linebacker room and DB room and be like, man, this isn't anything like what I've had in the past. He's going to be like, okay, I got me some dudes to work with. And now it's like, dude, don't screw it up. That's task number one. Don't F this up. You're walking into a pretty good situation. Keep it rolling. And it's because of that talent. And that gets you pretty fired up, man. Like, anytime I start feeling down about this higher, Trev, I'm like, look, man, I start listening to all the guys, and you're like, yeah, I ain't going to be all right. Because we don't think Trev, we don't think Chris Ash is a bad coach.
No.
I don't think he's an elite coach. And I have some issues with, some things I've heard about him. But it isn't like he's not Brian Van Gorder, where who's the only coach in the country that could screw up Jalen Smith? Brian Van Gorder. He literally ruined Jalen Smith's ability to just be an all-time great. And he was still pretty freaking good. Won a Butkus Award. But that's the thing, is like, he's not that. And so when you start getting down or questioning, you start just listening to all the players coming back, and you're like, all right, they're going to be all right.
Literally anything short of Chris Ash telling them to go do the wrong thing, it's going to be fine, right? He's walking into a winning situation, and that was something that you and I both talked about when the hire was announced. But the depth of talent is crazy, and it was an ongoing conversation that you and I had and that we've had with others as the season went on, once the injuries started to mount up. And it was always, gosh, I mean, in past years, you lose Ben Morris, and that's your season. In past years, you lose 2 Vipers, that's your season. In one season, you lose basically 3 defensive tackles. I mean, that's your season, and Notre Dame played in the national championship. They were a 3rd and 11 stop away from potentially going down and tying it, man. I mean, look, there is a lot of reason for skepticism, and I can absolutely admit that. But I am, now that I've had time to kind of digest everything, and when I mean everything, I think people forget the loss of the national championship, Al Golden's departure, and Chad Bowden's departure was like 96 hours apart.
It's ridiculous.
Okay. So now that I've had time to kind of digest everything and the smoke is starting to clear, you sit back, and to Brian's point, you're like, gosh, this is still a really good football team. And what you're losing in leadership, you're making up for really outside of because I don't know if the defensive tackle room has a Riley Mills in it. From
it doesn't as we know right now. It doesn't.
Right.
There's no easy well, when he's gone, Jack Kaiser's gone. We loved him, but it's like that is the position where you're just like, well, I love Jack, great job. I don't want this to sound disrespectful, but they're going to be just fine because Jack did a great job. But you're like, oh, okay, I guess we have to start the Kingston, William, Asa, Jaden Alsbury, Jalen Snead era. It's like, well, it sucks to be us.
I guess we have to rotate in Madden for Ramo.
I know, right?
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And so
this needs more snaps for Jaden Alsbury. I don't know how they're going to win any games with that.
I know it, man. I know it. And when you start thinking about this team in that context and this side of the ball in that context, it's like, man, whoever takes over at defensive coordinator, compounded with the first overall point that we had is, head coaches in general just kind of have their tendencies. Lincoln Riley has been at different places now. He has had different offensive coordinators. And the one thing that has been consistent is that guy can develop quarterbacks, right? You go through and you look at the work that he's done, remains to be seen, post Caleb Williams, right? But still, the fact of the matter remains, when a coach has an identity like that, it's kind of like, think of Brian Hartline at Ohio State. The dude knows receivers, man. And he has the absolute track record to prove it. Marcus Freeman is a guy that just knows defenses. And you have to assume that based on who he hired and who he's recruiting, he's almost kind of like, I don't mean for this word to be reflective of any coach, but he's almost like dummy proofed it. You know what I mean? Like it's literally based on the play. Like that's how I look at it. I'm not saying that this is an unstoppable force because that's what this entire conversation is about, is how do they become that? But with the just laundry list of talent that they have, I do firmly believe they would have to have a Brian Van Gorder-esque type of coordinator to come in for it to not play well. And I don't think Chris Ash is that. But the talent, the talent absolutely helps cushion whatever potentially could happen in 2025.
Well, a big thing is Marcus Freeman is not going to let it be what Brian Van Gorder was, because he will be more like Marcus. There's this notion that Marcus Freeman is just going to override a bunch of play calls in the middle of the game. I don't see that happening very often. That's a really quick way to lose your trust of your coaches. But I think that as we've seen, we saw a little bit late in the Oklahoma State game, he'll step in if it needs to happen. But we've also seen more so changes within a week, from week to week. Brian Kelly's just lack of, to use an NCAA term, lack of institutional control of the football team allowed for that to just manifest and grow and become a cancer.
No.
Marcus Freeman's chopping that sucker off the minute it even looks like it might be a problem. And that's the thing too, is I have a hard time believing, no matter what I think of the hire, that this is going to go on for let's just say Chris Ash is a bad coach. I have no thought at all that Marcus Freeman will wait till year 3 and then Pete Bavacqua's got to step in and make a change. This is exactly what happened with Brian Van Gorder. Yeah. Is Brian Kelly had no intention of firing Brian Van Gorder. Brian Kelly's boss said, you're going to fire Brian Van Gorder. And Brian Kelly, is a survivalist, if anything. But I just don't see that becoming the issue for Marcus Freeman. And so that's where you say, Trev, like that presence is there. But again, even like, so it won't be Brian Van Gorder, even if he is that bad of a coach. But as we said, for all the critiques we have and the concerns we have, he's not that. Like my concern is that he's more, like I don't even know that like is he a Bob Diaco? Like that's my concern, where like he's good but he's not great. If you give him the right talent, he'll be able to do some things. But then when you get in those big game situations against teams that maybe do something a little bit unorthodox, he's going to struggle a little bit. More that than he is a Brian Van Gorder. Yeah. But that's not going to win you a championship. And that's the thing that we're looking for here, is for Notre Dame to win a championship. But again, it's not that. But to your point, though, Trev, it's almost kind of like, but even that 2015 team had holes in certain spots, no depth on that team. And this team is just different. So the talent is a big thing. And part of that talent too, Trevor, is what excites me about this defense as we move forward is just thinking of the youth movement that Notre Dame went through last year and how much that's going to pay off in 2025. Because you think about the identity, who were the face of the defense this year? It was the guys we've talked. It was Xavier Watts. It was Riley Mills. I mean, those were your two All-Americans. Jack Kaiser's a captain. And you think of Benjamin Morrison, who was kind of your star coming into the season, along with Xavier Watts, and those guys are gone. But you had RJ Oben came in, and Jordan Clark and Rod Hurd, and they all played key roles. But man, there was so much youth being playing on this defense this year. I'm going to pull this up, Trevor, and I'm going to look at the Pro Football Focus snaps and the number of snaps that were played on defense this year by a first or second year player. So the number of players that were in their first or second year that played more than 200 snaps. You had Kingston, Bryce Young, see here, Jaden Ausbury. You had Drake Bowen, Leonard Moore, Christian Gray, and Don Schuler. So 7 players from your freshman or sophomore class played more than 300 snaps this year. Boubacar played 133 as a true sophomore and would have played a lot more. I mean, so even though he only played 133, a lot of those snaps were done in bulk in the first 5 games. And then you had a bunch of redshirt sophomores like Josh Burnham, Jalen Sneed, Junior Telemaka, Donovan Heinisch, who all played 400 or more snaps. So you're talking about, what did I just list? 11 guys that have 2 or more seasons of eligibility remaining going into next season, all played over 300 snaps last season. And then you talk about, that's not even talking returners. That's not talking about the veterans like Gabriel Rubio and guys that were already veteran players. We're not even talking about those. Those are just guys that this season had 3 or more seasons of eligibility. Going into next year, have at least 2 years of eligibility that played over 300 to 400 snaps on offense. That is a lot of youth that played a lot of snaps, and they played well. And you start thinking about what they're going to look like next year when they've got all these snaps under their belt. So it's not just talent, Trevor, because talent can only take you so far. It's experienced talent now. And that's going to be a big difference going into next season.
Well, to put some numbers, what you were talking about with Boubacar, he was on pace to have over 420 snaps over the course of a 16-game season. If you break down what he did in his first 5 games.
And that includes he got hurt in the first half against Louisville, Trevor. You know what I mean?
Yeah. You go through and think about it, and it wasn't that long ago where all of the great leaders of Notre Dame's team that really turned it around after the first bye week. But it wasn't that long ago where we were asking where those guys were. You know what I'm saying? Like outside of Xavier Watts, it was what is Howard Cross and Riley Mills doing? What's going on with RJ Oben? It was a lot of those questions. And what was carrying Notre Dame's defense early on? It was the young guys.
Outside of Xavier.
Literally. And you go through and you look at, in the secondary, outside of Xavier Watts, it was Christian Gray and Don Schuler. 2 first-time starters, a redshirt freshman and a true sophomore. You go through and you look at, okay, well, Jack's taking a little bit to kind of catch on. Don't really know what's happening here. Well, who started to stand out and start to rise and come up? Jaden Ausbury, Drake Bowen, Kingston Viliama was playing as a true freshman. So along the defensive line, RJ Oben is not really what we thought he was going to be coming into this season. Riley Mills and Howard Cross don't seem to be playing like the 2023 versions of themselves yet. So who steps up? Boubacar, Junior Tuialamaka, who didn't even see meaningful defensive snaps till this 3rd game of the year.
Josh Burnham.
Yeah, Josh Burnham. Bryce Young, a true freshman. Logan Thomas stepped in when he needed to. I think Logan Thomas got a sack in the IU game.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so you go through.
Well, remember, he had a fumble return for a touchdown that was called back against Louisville.
Yeah, he did.
It was the right call, but he was in the game. The point is he was in the game when that happened, and that was the 5th game of his career. Mm-hmm. So, and only the 2nd time he'd ever really played football. Crazy stat for you. This year, Logan Thomas had 5 total quarterback pressures, 2 sacks, 2 hits on the quarterback, and a pressure. Trevor, he had 28 pass rush snaps. That's it.
Talk about efficiency.
That's it. Now, again, I don't anticipate him doing this, but just for fun, if we were to take his pressure, just take his how many times he gets a hit on the quarterback on a per snap basis, and you give him the same number of pass rush snaps as Junior Telemaka, he would have 30 sacks plus hits on the quarterback. That's not total. That's a great year in just pressures.
Yeah.
I'm talking about he would have that many sacks plus hits on the quarterback. For context's sake, this year, Abdul Carter for Penn State this season had 23 hits plus sacks on the quarterback on 352 pass rushes. If you look at total pressures that Logan Thomas had on a per snap basis, and you give him as many total pass rush opportunities as Abdul Carter, Abdul would have finished with 66 pressures. Logan Thomas would have had 63. Now, again, that's not how it works.
Right.
But I'm just saying, if you just look at that small sample size, even he, who didn't play a lot, showed impact talent in the limited snaps he had. Right. And I'm not saying that it's like they should have given him more snaps, because if they'd have given him more snaps, he would have been Abdul Carter. That's not the point I'm making. I'm simply saying he's a young kid that didn't play a whole lot, but in those moments, he showed that type of flash. And as you said, Trev, he stepped into some moments in a couple occasions this year where he was playing meaningful snaps against Indiana. He didn't play a lot of snaps against Indiana, but they were meaningful because the game was kind of on the line. Same against Louisville. They were meaningful snaps. And that's something that you look at and say, he doesn't even include in our number of young players that got a lot of snaps this year. And you start getting kind of fired up about that.
Well, in big picture, you go through and you look at what this all means, right? Because that's kind of what we're talking about today. Why are we optimistic about the 2025 defense? It's because in recent years, or with other teams that experience that level of turnover, when they lose a Xavier Watson, a Riley Mills, and a Ben Morrison, and a Howard Cross, and an RJ Oben, typically the people that are behind them, the players that are behind them, are going through what Notre Dame's young guys went through in 2024, right? But now they're asking them to be like, okay, we need you to go have that productivity without having that veteran leadership and experience on the field with you. Right. That's the difference, and which is something that's really exciting, right? Because you talk about like this team just played 16 games. There's only 3 other teams outside of Notre Dame that played in 16 games this season. And there's only one other team that played in the national championship in the first ever 12-team college football playoff. That experience is invaluable to guys who have now seen the entire process all the way through. Now, the biggest question is, can you take that experience and run with it? Or are you going to hang your hat on the fact that you made it that young and take it for granted? It's like, oh, we know what to do to get there. I don't think it's going to be the latter of those two, but you go through and think, and just the experience itself and the youth behind it is really, really exciting.
So here's some numbers to put behind it, Trevor. I'm looking at the 12 most played the guy, because you have go 11 most snaps on the defense. You have 11 starters. See, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of those 11 were by freshmen, sophomores, or redshirt sophomores. Only one of those 6 was a redshirt sophomore. That's Josh Burnham. Christian Gray was number 2 on the team in snaps. And Don Schuler was number 3. Leonard Moore was 4. Drake Bowen was 7. He had over 600 snaps this year. Jaden Alsbury was 11. And then right behind Jaden Alsbury, 4 snaps behind is a redshirt sophomore, Donovan Heinisch. 1 snap behind him is a redshirt sophomore in Jalen Sneed. 1 snap behind him, true story, is another redshirt sophomore, Junior Tuihalamaka. And your number 17 and 18 guys were a couple of freshmen, Bryce Young and Kingston Viliamasa, who all had over 340 snaps. And somebody asked the question the other day, how much does the playoff help your team in preparation? Last year in 2023, Notre Dame played 13 games. They had 13 players on defense that played over 300 snaps. right? It's a decent amount. They used a heavier rotation. This year, Notre Dame had 20 guys who played over 300 snaps. That's a big difference. And that's not just the game snaps, but that's also, think of the practice work they got in those additional weeks. And that's a reason why you start looking ahead saying, I think it'll be okay on defense this year. And like Sean and I talked about yesterday, Trev, these aren't a bunch of try-hard guys we're talking about.
No.
A couple of those guys are. But when we start talking about Leonard Moore and Christian Gray and Adon Schuler and Drake Bowen and Jaden Alsbury and Jalen Sneed and Josh Burnham, these are guys with some Bryce Young, Kingston, Logan Thomas, Boubacar. We're talking about some guys that have some talent, and it's a different level. And you think if your coaching is good, if your strength program is good, the expectation is that the vast majority of these guys take steps forward next season. And that's something to kind of be pretty excited about when you look at this defense.
Oh yeah, I mean that's the biggest difference in talent overall, right? I mean, once you start breaking it down, position group by position group, even, you know what I'm saying? If you break it down, you start looking at the secondary. The secondary alone, I believe, should still, and I know you do too, should still remain a strength of this defense. There's no sign of it. Now, I do believe that there'd be more question marks if Ben Morrison played the entire season. Leonard Moore would rotate in, kind of like what he was doing a little bit before Ben Morrison like completely got hurt. But I think there'd still be more questions around, okay, now you have to find a way to replace Watts and Morrison.
We'd be talking about what we think Leonard Moore can do, not what we know Leonard Moore can do.
Mm-hmm.
Which now we're talking about what we know Leonard Moore can do because he had to play so much.
Which is just, first of all, Notre Dame they need to start being in the conversation of becoming a routine candidate for producing top-level quarterbacks, right? Like and now, sure, there's going to need to be some more, per the national media, there's going to have to be more results, I guess. You know, you had Cam Hart, you had Ben Morrison, but now you have the emergence of Leonard Moore. Christian Gray, I believe, is poised to have a really good comeback season in 2025, and then you look at what happens behind it.
Christian Gray was a lot better than some Notre Dame fans think he was last year. A lot better. And he had a couple rough moments, and then he got put in a situation he shouldn't have got put in the championship game because nobody was really going to step up in that spot and be able to just lock down Jeremiah Smith. But let's not forget, when Benjamin Morrison got hurt, there were a lot of Notre Dame fans who now like to bang on Christian Gray that at the time were talking about how they're going to be fine without Benjamin Morrison because they've got Leonard Moore and Christian Gray was playing better than him anyway. Remember that conversation that people were having? Christian Gray is playing better than Benjamin Morrison anyway.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, well, now you all want to go out there and act like Christian Gray sucked all year. Christian Gray had a couple bad games this season, and then snap here, snap there. Outside of that, he was a pretty good football player when you consider he's a first-year starter. And he had some pretty big moments. I mean, even in the game against USC where he struggled, that kid still had a fourth down stop on the first drive of the game to get them to that point in time. He had 10 passes defense this season, which according to Pro Football Focus this season, right? Which I think was second on the team, first on the team. Well, let me go look and see what the official stats were. But according to Pro Football Focus, he was tied with Xavier Watts for the most passes defensed. If you look at the national rank, or like the official rankings, so not Pro Football Focus, but the official rankings, Christian Gray this year had 3 interceptions and 9 passes defensed. So he had 12 passes defensed. Leonard Moore had 13. So he trailed Leonard Moore by 1 pass defensed. So he was pretty good this year, Trev. And that was as a true sophomore making his first year as a starter. You expect him to get better, especially with what we know of his work ethic. Leonard Moore, as long as he stays hungry, is going to get better. Adon Schuler, I mean, sophomore, freshman. Their best football's probably still ahead of them. And then you have the transfer portal pickups. Devontae Smith's a really good football player for Alabama last year. He's not going to come to Notre Dame and be like, oh, this is a stage that's too big for me. He played against Alabama, Georgia last year. You know what I mean? He's played in the national championship game. He's played in college football playoff games. You got a guy that's been on this stage and been in these moments before. And so you add him to your nickel rotation. You add Jalen Stroman to your safety rotation. Is Jalen Stroman going to start? We'll see. If he does, they're going to have a good football player there. If he doesn't, it means somebody beat him out. And that's a great sign. And so what that does is that allows you to have a little bit of protection in case your younger players aren't as ready to play right away as what Christian was, as what Adon was, and as what Leonard was. So if Luke Talich isn't ready to take that big step to become a starter, or if Kennedy Urlacher's not ready for that, or if Bronte Johnson's not ready for that, or if your elite incoming freshman DB class of Jadon Blair and Brandon Logan, Ethan Long at safety, and then Dallas Gold, Mark Zachary, and Cree Thomas a corner isn't ready to help you right away, you're good. Oh, and by the way, I keep forgetting about their 6'1", 195-pound rising sophomore who's probably this, a step behind Leonard Moore and Christian Gray in pure speed in Carson Hobbs. So it's like you feel like, okay, they're going to be pretty good. And the reason that we say all those names is because depth of talent helps ensure that there's no drop-off, because you're not just depending on one guy to step in and replace a stud that left. It's of these four, you just need one to step up and play.
Yeah.
And that's why depth is so important, is that right there, because you may miss on one guy, but your odds of missing on four are slim when you've got the track record that Notre Dame has of identifying talent in the secondary. And that's what kind of gets you. You don't need 6 of your freshmen to step up and help you this year. You really don't need any. But if one does, you're in a great place. And that's what gets you, like, okay, to your point, Trev, like you brought up, this is why we expect this secondary to not miss a beat. Even with do I expect Jalen Stroman or whoever to be as good as Xavier Watts? No. But I think Adon Schuler is going to be better than he was. Not Xavier, than he was, than Adon was. Adon's going to be better than Adon. Leonard's going to be better than Leonard. Christian's going to be better than Christian. And I think Devontae Smith has a chance to at least be as good as what Jordan Clark was, maybe better.
Yeah.
And that's why, as a unit, even though there's no Xavier Watts, as a unit, the expectation is that they're going to just keep rolling, if not be better than what they were this past season. And remember, we said that last offseason. And some people kind of like mocked it, like, come on, you lost Cam Hart, you lost this year, and we're like, look, don't be shocked if it's even better than it was last year. And it absolutely was. At the very least, every bit as good as it was last year.
Oh, yeah.
And I would argue that in a lot of instances, it was even better as a unit than what it was last year.
Well, I think that's just the toughest part. I mean, going back to the conversation around Christian Gray, man, that's the life of a corner. Yeah, I would put cornerback up there with quarterback in that, to the eye, like when you're watching it on TV, their mistakes are the most glaring, right? Obviously, quarterback mistakes, you miss a wide open guy, you throw an interception, everybody's like, what the heck is that? I would say a close second is corner, right? Because a lot of times when a corner does something well, it doesn't get highlighted, right? Yes, interceptions get highlighted, but like just good coverage, like that's why stats are so hard to track as corners. Yeah, everybody wanted to bang on Ben Morrison at the start. Say, well, he's not having as good of he doesn't have as many interceptions. Like, but see, here's the thing. The way that I look at it is typically if a corner's doing his job, he doesn't really get targeted all that much, right, which means he's going to have less opportunities to get interceptions. The reason why he had so many in 2022 is seems like, okay, do we throw at Cam Hart or the true freshman? Mm-hmm. I guess we'll throw at the true freshman, and Ben Morrison made him pay for it, And so you go through and with Christian, I think it was a lot of that. He did a lot of good things this season. A lot in 2024. It's just the mistakes are more highlighted. And like, who are we talking about? When
you play man defense and you make a mistake, it's everyone in the planet's going to know that you made a mistake.
100%.
That's
100%.
The nature of man defense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Which is why Christian went on record so many times. He talked about it in the Here Comes the Irish documentary. He's talked about it in interviews about just Marcus Freeman and Mike Mickens talking about just, hey, one play, one life. You have to flush it. You have a bad play, you turn around and you could have a 98-yard interception return on the next play. And that's the life of a corner. But they have so many guys loaded up in that room. I say all that to say they have a depth of talent that I think can compete with anybody's depth of talent in all of college football in the secondary, something that has now been a story for multiple years. and something that I haven't been able to say outside of really 23 and 24 in my entire span of being a Notre Dame fan. And that's what makes you excited about the secondary unit, man.
You know what's funny is a year ago we were talking about, Benjamin and Christian are going to be a great duo. And then going into 24, the talk is going to be about Christian Gray being a star. Well, and then we are in that situation where another corner is now being mentioned as the next star, but it's not Christian Gray. It's Leonard Moore. And what he did this year was not a fluke. It was not like he had he got targeted a lot and made some interceptions. Like we've seen that before where a freshman gets a lot of picks and he gets a lot of a lot of focus. And so he makes plays because they go at him a lot, but you look at his numbers and he's like, he gave up a lot of catches and all that. He wasn't really as good as his production. Leonard Moore was every bit as good on film and grading him out as his accolades show. I mean, he was special. And when you look at a guy like Christian, he's going to get better. He didn't finish as well as he started, but he showed early in the season. And at times in the middle of this, late in the season, when he like Penn State, he was very good against Penn State. He had that one hold, but he was very good against Penn State. He was very good against Indiana. The only play where they beat him against Indiana that early in the game, he was in perfect coverage. The guy caught the ball with his knees, literally. Have you gone back and seen that he literally caught the ball with his knees because he couldn't catch it clean because of Christian's coverage. He struggled on a couple plays against Georgia, was good outside of that. And then he had a couple mistakes against Ohio State. Some of that was on him, and so it's also about, as a coaching staff, doing a better job of putting Christian in more situations. Like somebody in the chat's talking about, you'll know who it is because it's a negative comment. Just kidding, Chris. Love you, man. But talking about how, Christian Gray's at fault and, Marvin or Emeka Egbuka's calling out what he's doing. And that's not a Christian Gray problem. That's a coaching problem. Talking about how he's inside leverage. And when he does inside leverage, they knew he was going to do that because he'd done that all year. Why are you asking him to do that? Because when he's good is when he's coming up and playing more aggressively or playing more man coverage. That's a tough thing to ask of a younger player playing to the field. They hadn't had a young guy playing to the field for a while because Cam was a fifth-year senior in 23 and a senior in 2022. And so those are the things you say, could you have maybe done a better job of putting him in some better spots? Sure. But now it's up to Christian to say, okay, sure, that's true. But now you've got to make the improvements to say you're going to be able to play those things better. And you expect him to do that because, again, he was a sophomore who played 100-some snaps the year before. Now you're going into your junior season, and there isn't that same pressure on Christian to be the next Benjamin Morrison because that guy is now Leonard Moore.
Yeah.
Now it's just go be you. He played 198 snaps, by the way, the year before. And a chunk of those came in the bowl game. Mm-hmm. The last two games, really, because he played 32 against Stanford and then 30 against Oregon State. So a third of his snaps came in two games. And now it's like, okay, raise your level of play. But I mean, that's the kind of thing where I'm talking about, Trevor's like, and if he struggles, you've got Carson Hobbs, you've got Dallas Golden, you've got Cree Thomas, you've got Mark Zachary, you've got, they could leave Bronte Johnson at corner. The plan is to move him back to safety, but I talked to a couple people that said he looked so good at corner that he was an emergency corner. That's the only reason he moved to corner. But he looked so good playing it that they're like, do we want to consider keeping him there or not? That's a good problem to have.
Yeah.
And so when I look at those things, it's kind of like the talent is there. And the one thing Chris and I can agree on is he's got to be more consistent with his technique. That we absolutely agree on. And the comment that Chris made that I do agree on is that's what makes Benjamin Morrison, but most guys are not that way. Most guys are not like Benjamin. Leonard Moore was not like Benjamin. Leonard Moore is just so fast that he can overcome some of his own mistakes, which is easier to do in the boundary than it is to the field. And that's what people have to understand as well. Christian has got a lot more room to work, which means those mistakes you make can be more glaring because there's more room for you to get beat with those mistakes.
Right.
He's got to become more technically proficient. If Christian takes great pride in his craft this offseason, and I'm not saying he hasn't, I'm just saying this is what moving forward. And now that you've got the experience, you understand the coverages, you know the defenses, you know what. Now it's about, dude, perfect your craft. He's going to be really good next season, as long as he gets that mistakes out of his, like when a play like that can happen to a young guy, sometimes that can haunt him. If Christian can just put it behind him, it is what it is, move on, and understand that probably every cornerback on your roster probably gets beat in that same situation. Move past it. Focus on becoming that guy that takes more pride in his craft now that you're a veteran. Then he's going to be outstanding, and this could end up being the best corner combo Notre Dame's had in a long time, which is saying something when you consider what they had in 2023 with Cam Hart and Benjamin Morrison. But it's going to require Christian to really look, to put all the negativity out of his mind, because he was a pretty good player for the most of this year. Put that negativity out of your mind, put those couple big plays out of your mind, and just say, hey, man, I'm going to get in the lab, and I'm going to put all my attention on, I'm going to be like, learn from Benjamin Morrison, study his film, the efficiency with his footwork, how to be handsy without grabby. Benjamin was great at being handsy without grabby.
Yeah.
That's something he's going to have to learn, because he gets grabby. And those are things, but the tools are there, Trevor, for Christian to be outstanding. And the performance he's building on was way better than some people want to give it credit for. And that's something that gets you excited about what he can be this next season.
Oh, yeah. Look, man, last thing I'll say before we kind of keep the train moving here is my prediction for 2025 is the Gray-Leonard Moore combo will start to resemble what the Hart-Morrison combo was in 23, but I think Christian Gray takes on more of the Cam Hart role. Leonard Moore is kind of like the shiny new toy, right? Like, he's the next big name. He's a preseason All-American, break it as a freshman, rightfully so, right? And same thing in 2023. Ben Morrison was the guy that held Marvin Harrison to what he had, 3 for 32 in that game in Notre Dame Stadium. Ben Morrison was
2 years against him, he gave up less than 100 yards combined.
Yeah, I mean, that's
because he played him a lot in 2022 as a true freshman as well, his first career game. Remember, he had the pass breakup. I think that might have actually been on. That was on Marvin. He broke a pass up in front of Marvin Harrison.
Yeah.
That whole offseason, all the Ohio State fans kept telling us that Marvin's going to be better than what Jackson Smith and Jigba was, and all that other kind of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, you go through and you look at the potential of them, and I could see Christian Gray kind of taking on that role of the Cam Hart, like just the old reliable, playing really, really good football, and that's just that's what I see from Christian. Now, moving along here on the defense, you start talking about what other groups you expect to kind of maintain and even elevate their level of play. Linebackers are 100% in that conversation. And it's a combination now of not just the explosiveness and the potential of the athleticism of the young guys. Now you throw the experience in on top of that, man, we're talking about a really, really talented group of guys in the linebacking room, Bryan. Really talented.
I had a former Notre Dame player and I were having a disagreement on Notre Dame's talent late in the season. And he told me he didn't think Notre Dame's linebackers ran. Like, he thought I was nuts for thinking their linebackers were as athletic as the Georgia and those kind of guys. And I was like, wow. And there's this group of Notre Dame fans, and I don't know where this comes from, that just is down on the linebackers. I don't get it. I have no idea where that comes from, because I think the linebackers were pretty good this year. They were inconsistent at times. They played like you'd think a group of younger players are going to play, where at times they weren't in the position they needed to be. And at times they, would have some fits that weren't great. But overall, especially when you put the context of their youth, I thought the linebacker room was pretty good this year. And, and gosh, I mean, as much as I have banged on Pro Football Focus and how much I hate their grades and things like that, I mean, they had Drake Bowen as an 80 grade this season, which is really good, by the way. I think that's better than what they had Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah back in 2020. Actually, yeah, he would have been the second highest graded player on the entire 2021 defense. And he would have been the number 1 graded player on the 2020 defense. Now, again, I have my issues with Pro Football Focus, so I hesitate to put too much emphasis onto that. But that's a pretty darn good season for him. And when you consider it was his first year really being a player in the Notre Dame defense to the degree that he played some mop-up minutes the year before and things like that. And here's nothing. You look at the number of runs, like stuffs that he had. In 2023, J.D. Bertrand had 31 run stops, and he had on 647 snaps. So don't look at games played, look at snaps. 647, and he had 31 run stops. This year, Drake Bowen had 30 run stops on 615 snaps. So you're talking about a guy that from a run stopping standpoint was very similar to what J.D. Bertrand was the year before as a 5th-year senior. And that's why I keep saying, like, this kid was a pretty good football player for Notre Dame last year. You look at his number of tackles. He had 40 solo tackles, 38 stops. The year before, J.D. Bertrand had 76 tackles, 41 solos, 35 assisted tackles. Again, you say, well, he played 16. No. Number of snaps. He played 30 fewer snaps than J.D. played the year before because he was part of a bigger rotation. So his production on a per-snap basis was better than what J.D. Bertrand's was the year before as a 3rd-year starter and a 5th-year senior on that defense. That's pretty darn good. Now, where J.D. was better is J.D. made more plays behind the line, and that's the next step for Drake. But when you look at what he did, what Kingston did, Jaden Ausberry did not start a single game all year and tied for 2nd on the Notre Dame defense in tackles for loss. Think about that. And then Jalen Sneed, early in the year, kind of looked a little bit like he did last year, athletic but out of position. But by the middle to end of the year, Jalen Sneed was becoming a playmaker for the Notre Dame defense, but he was doing it without having the mistake plays that plagued him so much in the past. That's the difference. Jaden Sneed's always been a playmaker, but it would be like you kind of got to balance his playmaking with, is he going to be in the right position? And they found that niche for him this year. Now he's going to be a senior next year. And then you're adding Madden Faramo. You've got Preston Zinner. You've got Bodie Cahoon coming off an injury. You've got Teddy Rizak. You've got Kahanu Kia should be back this spring after what he did last year. You're going to be deep at linebacker. You're going to be long at linebacker. You're going to be athletic at linebacker. And you're actually going to have more experience next year than you had this year. You don't have anyone on your defense that has the number of snaps that Jack Kaiser played, but your top 5 guys are going to be way more experienced than your top 5 guys last year. Last year it was Jack and then a bunch of dudes who never really played many meaningful snaps. This year, it's going to be a bunch of dudes that have played meaningful snaps. Even though they're still kind of young, they've played a lot of football. And when you combine that with talent, you're like, okay, I start getting a little bit fired up about what this linebacker core is going to be. And we saw that at times in the postseason. I mean, I thought against Georgia, the linebackers were outstanding.
Oh, they were fantastic.
You know, early on against Penn State, they struggled. Second half against Penn State, they were really good. So I'm fired up for what this defense, this group can be at linebacker. And it's another reason for optimism when you look at why we think this defense is going to be so good next year. And I'll say this, Trev, one of the question marks we have is defensive tackle. We've talked about that. I don't know that they have a Riley Mills. I don't think that they do. I don't know that they have, well, Riley Mills from Louisville on, right? I don't know that they have a Howard Cross from 2023. I do think they'll be better than what Howard Cross was in 2024.
Yeah.
Like, that's the thing we've got to remember. Howard Cross in 2024 wasn't as good as Howard Cross in 2023 because he was banged up a lot. He had a hamstring injury coming into the season. Then he had the knee injury later in the season. We never got the best of Howard Cross this year. But Riley Mills, we got really good version of Riley Mills the last 10 games of his career. I don't know who that replacement's going to be. I will say this, however, there's a chance that on the whole, this defensive line room could be better inside than it was last year because You don't have that impact guy at the top, but you have more beef this year. Because remember, Gabriel Rubio missed the first, 6 games of the year last year?
Yeah, with
5 games of the year last year with a foot injury.
Yep.
He was never full 100% because of coming back from that foot injury. Jason Onye gets booted off the team after 6 games. Riley Mills gets, starts and Cross starts slow. They go better. Then Riley goes down against Indiana. Howard goes down against Florida State. He was never the same. Even though he came back for the playoff, he was a shell of himself. So you are looking at it and you're losing some individually good players, but your unit as a whole was a mash unit all season, really. You never really got the best of what that D-tackle room could be, which I think makes it a little bit easier to transition, where now you've got more bodies, you're more experienced. Gabriel hopefully can be healthy this offseason. Donovan Heinisch got some much-needed experience. He gets another year in the weight room. Armo Mukum's now going to be a junior. He got a lot of reps this year. Sevillano is a year older. Brennan Vernon, Devin Houston. Hopefully Cole Mullins can come back from injury. I still don't understand why he's playing D-tackle, but whatever. That's what they're playing him. And then when you talk about what you're adding in the transfer portal, I think you can be steady there this year, where you weren't steady last year. They're not going to be as dynamic as what they were last year when that unit was on. There's no Riley Mills pass rusher. We'll talk about that in a second. But I actually do believe there's the potential to be more steady up the middle, where maybe you're not making the plays, but you're better at taking on blocks, you're better at eating up space, and you're better prepared to allow the linebackers to run to the ball than maybe you were this year. There's a chance for that. You need Jared Dawson to be what we hope he could be. You've got to hope that Rubio can get back to kind of what he was because I don't think Gabriel Rubio was as good this year as he was last year because of the foot injury and the time he missed in the offseason. He wasn't as productive. He didn't make as many plays on the ball. He'll be healthier now, and I expect him to be better. And so I think there's at least a chance that they're at the very least on the same level of last year's defensive tackle rotation. There's a chance they're better against the run, where I think I'm more confident they're going to take a step back, barring something breaking out that we don't anticipate. I don't think the pass rush is going to be as good. Jared Dawson is actually a better pass rusher on a per-snap basis than Riley Mills and Howard Cross were, but it's a different type of pass rush. He's a different type of body. He's not that 6'5" long guy like Riley Mills was, but he can rush the quarterback. I mean, I've pointed this out before. So the point is, it's a question mark, but it's not a question mark where we're like, there's no talent, there's no numbers. You've got 9 guys there that have some level of ability. You only got to find 4 of them that can play good football on a regular basis. That's where we say that depth is what comes into play of why you feel. So, I actually think there's a chance the D-tackle room, when you look at how it played out, not what we thought the D-tackle room was going to be or what the D-tackle room was when it was at its best, but just what it was from start to finish and what it was in the last 3 games after Riley got hurt. I certainly think the defensive tackle room in 2025 is going to be better than what it was against Penn State, Georgia, and Ohio State. Will it be better than what it was against Indiana when Riley was healthy? Okay, that's debatable, but they won a couple big games after Riley got hurt. And the defense wasn't terrible in those 2 games. So that's where I kind of come from and say, between all the different bodies, I feel like at least 4 or 5 of them can step up and give you some level of play to where, as a unit, you could actually be a bit improved than you were this year in a lot of areas in this defense. That's my 2 cents on that one, Trev. What do you think?
Yeah, man, I think the interior of the defensive line is just going to take on a little bit of a different role in 2025. I think you said it perfectly. I don't think you can rely on them as much of a pass rush, but I think Notre Dame is going to be more of an edge rushing team next season anyways because of who they bring back, right? So I think this year it was more of a glaring issue when their interior, when Riley Mills wasn't around, when Howard Cross wasn't healthy, when Donnie Heinisch wasn't able to generate a pass rush. And Gabe Rubio just isn't a pass rushing defensive tackle. That's fine. But I think it was more glaring this past season because of the lack of effectiveness of the edge rushers. This upcoming season, I think you're going to have a lot more production from them. So I think it not necessarily makes, I think it alleviates some of the pressure from your nose tackle and your 3 technique from having to be like, okay, we have to stop the run and we are one of the sole people on this team that can get after the quarterback too. I think that kind of put them in a little bit of a bind to where when we're watching the games, it makes it a little bit more obvious when one of those 2 things aren't happening. It's because they're wearing multiple hats, which to some degree you have to ask a defensive tackle to do. You can't just be, all right, we'll just go in there and eat up space. I know it's 3rd down. We're not expecting much of it.
You can in certain defenses,
Sure.
but not this one. And even like a team like Georgia, who asked their interior guys to just eat up space, on 3rd down, they make sub packages where they get different guys in the field. And to your point, Trev, is they'd have to adjust their philosophy a little bit to accommodate not having pass rushers.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas with Riley and Howard, you had 2 guys that could rush the passer. This unit, like if you have Jared Dawson on the field with Gabriel Rubio, which is possible because Jared Dawson played primarily 3 technique and even some 4-eye. At Louisville, like a lot of people think he's a nose tackle. He may be able to play nose tackle. I don't know, but he didn't play very much nose tackle for Louisville. He was a disruptive 3 technique. And so if you have those 2 on the field together, let's just say you have Gabriel at nose and Jared Dawson at 3 technique, you're okay there at one of those spots. But to your point, you're not going to get the same pass rush out of Gabriel Rubio than you did out of Howard Cross. I mean, and look, I think Gabriel Rubio is a better pass rusher than he showed this season because he had 1 pressure the whole year is what, according to Pro Football Focus. But that was on 130 pass rushes. He had 8 pressures last year on 68 pass rushes. So he has been a better pass rusher in the past. But if you give him the same number of snaps as this year, only had 15 pressures. And they were all hurries. None of them were like hits and sacks and things like that. You hope that he can at least, if he's healthy, give you at least a better push up the middle with those big, long arms, that he can be that kind of pressure player, Trevor, and then the quarterback doesn't have like lanes to step into. But to your point is, you're going to be okay losing that interior pass rush if your edges are better. And that's an expectation we have. Now, that's probably the biggest asterisk of all this. Somebody got really mad because I don't say asterisk right, but whatever. I don't care. You all know what I mean. This is the one where it takes more projection than other positions. Like at corner, at safety, at linebacker. It's like, dude, just have normal year 1 to year 2 growth. That's it. I don't need Christian Gray to be some, go from what he was in 2024 to Champ Bailey in 2025. Just have normal year 1 to year 2 growth as a starter. Drake Bone, I don't need you to become Manti Te'o next year. Just have normal year 1 to year 2 growth. Same thing with Kingston and Jaden and all those guys. Defensive end is the one position where and all those guys finish the year healthy for the most part. Defensive end is the one where you look at and say, A, it requires them to get guys healthy that right now aren't. B, it requires a bit of a coaching adjustment where you're going to have to do a better job, in my opinion. Washington did a lot of good things this year. One thing I need to see more of from this unit is just a better array of hand play, moves, counters as pure pass rushers than what we saw last year. One of the issues they had is if they rush wide and it's covered, they only had 1 move. And it usually just kind of resulted in their pass rush was dead, but there was still room for the quarterback to step into the pocket. That was okay because you were getting really good penetration from your interior guys. Well, if you don't have that next year, that becomes a problem. They need, like as I said the other day, they need more tools in the tool bag. We don't know if they're going to be taught that or not. And then number 3, I do think there's a level of projection of guys doing things we haven't seen them do a lot of. I think Josh Burnham has the tools to be a much better pass rusher than he has been, but he hasn't shown it. So can he show that? Can Junior Telemaka do that more consistently? Yes, he did it against Georgia, but we didn't then see that the next couple games. So there's a lot of projection there with some of those guys. Bryce Young has a lot of tools. He wasn't exactly super disruptive. He was flashy. He looked good doing it, but I wouldn't necessarily say that, the pressure numbers were all that impressive from Bryce. And that's something that he's going to have to do a better job of next year as well. So it's more than just normal jumps. And then, of course, Logan Thomas is another guy we'd have that conversation about. So, it's going to take a little bit more. And the other thing, too, is you're going to need more of just a normal freshman to sophomore jump from Bryce Young, because Notre Dame needs him to be more of an impact guy, not just a good pass rusher, but they need him to be an impact guy. That's where I think the edge possession discussion is a little bit different, because that's the one where I think we're projecting more than at least I am, than any other position. But at the same time, Trevor, we're going to get into the if game now, which is never where you want to be. You never want to be in the if game.
Right.
At DB, there's no ifs. Just do what you do. Just, your linebacker, guys, just keep normal development. DB, keep here. It's if. But the ifs are potentially like really exciting. If Boubacar comes back healthy and can stay healthy, that's an if. Mm-hmm. But if he does it, if Bryce Young makes the jump that we think his talent could dictate in year 2, if Logan Thomas can make that year 2 jump that I think he's capable of now, because remember, Logan Thomas missed a bunch of the offseason because of an injury, a shoulder injury.
Yeah.
He didn't do much in the spring. So he did what he did this year on just, you've got God-given talent. He didn't even have a lot of time in the weight room. Remember, he was injured almost all spring. Now he gets a full offseason in the weight room, in the strength program, in the defensive system, getting coached by Al Golden. If he has a big jump, if Josh Burnham improves his repertoire, there's a lot of ifs here, Trevor. But there's a lot of ifs of really athletic guys. Josh Burnham is the 6'4", 240-pound guy with super long arms and a lot of athleticism. Ryan and I used to talk about this, where we're sitting side by side at the Syracuse game in 2022 when he was a freshman, and we're watching him go through drills, and we're just like, that guy's just different. He moves different. He's built different. He's got some. He just hasn't been able to translate that athleticism that made him a great linebacker and quarterback in high school into being an edge rusher yet. Good edge setter in the run game. He's made some flashy plays. We're more talking about as a pass rusher.
Yeah.
But the tools are there. Bryce Young is 6'7", 265 and twitchy. Boubacar is 6'4", 240 plus and twitchy. Logan Thomas is 6'4", but he's got the length of a 6'8" guy, and he might be the most explosive guy they have. So the tools are outstanding, Trevor. It's just a lot of ifs to get him to play to that talent. But I got to be honest, this is the one position where I'm doing more projecting than I am just follow your normal progression. Just keep doing what you're supposed to do. And that can get a little bit risky. But this also might be the position group that has as much upside as any on the roster. I mean, think about it. If Boubacar's healthy and taps in his potential, Bryce Young does the same, Logan Thomas does the same, Josh Burnham does the same, and you get Junior has normal growth, and then you've maybe Chris Burgess can maybe help you out a little bit, or maybe they move Brendan Vernon out to end, or maybe they move Cole Mullins back out to end, or whatever the case may be. Jordan Patel, I forgot to mention Jordan Patelho. If he comes back healthy and just what he was last year, it's got the potential to be an outstanding group of edge players.
Yep.
But the counter is that requires a lot of ifs and projection that we're not making in other positions. The other positions were just normal growth and development. There's a lot of confidence is going to happen. This is more of you need to see bigger jumps. You need to see health and all these other type of things. And that's what makes it concerning. But it's also a reason for optimism, Trev, because if just half of those guys hit, whew.
Well, look, man, the reason why there's so many ifs, the way that I look at it is because it's the group of guys that you're asking them to do more than the secondary and the linebackers. But the reason why I'm comfortable playing the if game with them is because we are not asking them to do, the coaching staff isn't asking them to do anything that is beyond their realm of capabilities, right? There have been some D lineman rooms and some position groups at Notre Dame on past teams where it's like, yeah, I mean, if you ask that of them, you're asking them something that they can't physically do. It's just some of the maturation is going to have to go by a little bit quicker. For me, the storyline for the defensive line as a whole, interior, edge rushers, you have to play with a higher level of consistency because and health is absolutely a factor in that. But you can go and you can list off every single player that you talked about in between the D tackles and nose tackles, three techniques, Vipers, big ends. They all flashed at one point in 2024. Every single one of them did. But the thing is now it can't be so few and far in between. You know what I'm saying? Like it can't be, man, did you see Bryce Young on that play? And then we don't see him again virtually for another 6 quarters. And I'm not talking about it'd be great because he has the potential to, but like an Isaiah Foskey, like every third down, you're just probably going to see him. He has that potential to get there. I'm not asking for that to be the jump from your true freshman year to your true sophomore year, right? But the progression has to be more than just you were a flashy freshman with a lot of upside to, okay, now you're a contributor on defense to then the junior year. It's like, okay, this dude is a dude. What you're kind of in the position now is, hey, Bryson, you're going to kind of have to make that jump from being a true freshman to like the tail end of your sophomore year where you're coming on and being that guy. He's one of, right? Because to your point, with the mass depth of talent that they have, odds are you're going to hit on a couple, right? Like that is literally just numbers and probability.
What are the odds that none of those guys make the jump? And that's the point.
Yeah.
What evidence do you have that at Notre Dame under Marcus Freeman, the way that it has been the last several years, that we don't see a position group have anybody step up? It hasn't happened. We haven't seen that happen. So you like you said, Trev, you have to think at least one guy steps up. Odds are greater that 2 step up in some capacity, even if it's 2 guys in the same position, which we'll actually talk about here in a second. But we're going to have some fun before our mailbag. We're actually going to talk about breakout players next. And so, but before we do that, folks, see that little thumbs up down there below? Go ahead and hit that for us if you don't mind, which is the like button. It helps us support our channel. Make sure you share this podcast. See, all these things help us with the algorithm, so that way YouTube will hopefully then start promoting our show more than they have been the last year, which I know some of you have complained about. That's why you got to hit that like. We had a show yesterday, Trev, that has over 6,000 views on it, right? So we did the RTCF show. It's got over 6,600 views from yesterday. It's only got 389 likes. I just hit the like, so it's just 390. It's a very low percentage. So if you're listening to the show and you like what we're doing, hit that like button. That's the thing that kind of helps us promote the show. So we would really appreciate that. And it takes you literally, I did that. I'm going to do it again. 1, 2, 3. 3 seconds to do it. That's it. 3 seconds and you're helping us out. So we'd greatly appreciate it. And of course, as always, make sure you sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com.
All right, Brian, we're going to get into a little bit of a fun conversation here, man. And this one is definitely more of, we're talking about projection, and we're going to talk about some players that we believe are going to be potential breakout players, right? And for me, this is always a fun conversation because, one, Notre Dame had a lot last season, right? It's kind of that conversation of who isn't going to break out. Like Drake Bowen had his, Leonard Moore had his, Adon Schuler had his. There's a lot of different areas across this team that it's going to be interesting to see where we think are going to be breakout players. So, Brian, starting with the D-line, kind of picking up where we left off here, who do you kind of see breaking out in 2025?
Well, let's start, Trevor, from sort of in the same way we started our position-by-position breakdown. We'll go from the back end to the front, right? So we'll start on the back end. And a guy that I think is going to be a breakout player for Notre Dame next year. Obviously, I count Leonard Gray as kind of already having broken out. He was an impact player already, highly productive, freshman All-American, freshman player of the year, preseason All-American. I don't know how much better he's going to get. So for Leonard Moore, it's like, dude, just keep doing what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
The guy that I think is going to be a breakout player next season is Christian Gray. That's my first one that I go with is Christian Gray. Because A, we've seen him do it. We've seen him do it for long stretches of the season. And we've seen him step up in big moments. Fourth quarter against Texas A&M. We've seen him step up with the fourth quarter against Penn State, game on the line, having just played that route perfectly. Great play there. Fourth down stop against USC, pick six against USC. Even in the worst game of his career, he had two huge game-changing plays that helped you win that football game. An early fourth down and two stop, and then the pick six when they're trying to tie the ball game up in the fourth quarter. Like, you're a playmaker even when you're at your worst, you're making game-changing plays. You know what I mean? And so that's an aspect of his talent is there. He's going to get elite coaching with Mike Mickens. He's long, he's fast. He learned a lot this year. He moved back and forth from field to boundary last year. He was all field this year. Some of the technical mistakes he made, you hope he works out of his system this next season. That's what I say. If he does what I think he's going to do, which is just focuses on his craft, which is footwork and hand play, that's going to be a big thing. And then once you get into spring ball and fall camp, it's, do a better job of how you play certain routes, understanding how your leverage naturally takes certain things away. So you don't have to bite on an inside move on a vertical route because I'm taking the inside away anyway. If you try to cross my face, I'm going to lock you up. I don't need to bite when you make that inside move, like a lot of corners do. The technical part improves. The skill is there. The playmaking is there. And now the experience is there. Now he's creeping up on almost 1,000 career snaps in 2 years. Now you say, okay, now he's ready to really take this thing off to where everyone's going to be talking about Leonard Moore next year. And anyone who doesn't watch Notre Dame regularly is going to be talking about how Christian Gray struggled in this, and they're going to have all those negative things to say about him. But you and I know differently. And if he can get rid of some of those young guy mistakes, he's going to be a guy that has a breakout. And all of a sudden people are going to talk about not that Leonard Moore's one of the best cornerbacks in the country, but that this is the best cornerback tandem in the country. I think that's what the discussion is going to be next year. And it's going to be because of Christian Gray, because Leonard Moore's already there, right? The play is there. The reputation is there. The production is there. Now Christian steps into that mix as well. And this becomes a great cornerback room, assuming that the defensive coordinator still uses them the right way, which I hope that they do. That's the only unknown we have. And that's true for all of this stuff we talked about, is what changes the D coordinator make. I'm working with the assumption he's not going to make a lot. Nothing major. But that's where I expect Christian to be my first breakout player.
Yeah, I like that move. I mean, he's poised to be in a good spot to have his breakout season. I like that you highlighted Leonard Moore for already having for all the accolades that he's racked up over his first season playing. For me, in the secondary, it's tough, right? Because I want to put whoever's filling Xavier Watts' void as a breakout player, but I don't know who that's going to be. But I don't want to put a Don Schuler, because to me, I think he already had it. Like
if you were going to argue a Don, you could look at it from the standpoint of, I don't know that his play is going to get a lot better, but I think his reputation is going to have a breakout. He'll start getting viewed different, because like that can be part of a breakout too, Trevor, is you're not necessarily a better player, but your reputation now backs up the level of play that you have. And it's not always true that a guy necessarily plays better. It's just that now the guy has a reputation to go with that. And now all of a sudden you play just as well, but now you're getting All-American nominations, or now you're getting, you're on these lists of top 5 safeties and things like that. Like, I don't know, like, where's a Don going to be in preseason magazines when like they do their defensive back rankings and safety rankings? I don't know. I think so. You could argue, if you wanted to, Trev, that his play might not make a big jump, but his reputation will. But I think your focus is more on guys that are going to make a breakout from a production and play standpoint, which I completely think is fair.
Yeah, that's what I was looking at it from the lens of. Now, if we're going from a national reputation because I think Notre Dame fans have a big respect for Adon Schuler. Like, I think they're pretty well known of him. I think nationally Adon could have a breakout. So all things considered, he'll be mine because I agree with everything that you said about Christian Gray. So yeah, Adon for me is mine in the secondary.
I think we'll have a safety breakout. I just don't know who it's going to be. I don't know if it's going to be Adon reputation-wise. I don't know if it's going to be Jalen Stroman, playing in a defense where he's got a better supporting cast. I don't know if it's going to be Luke Talich. It could be a freshman, Jadon Blair. It could be Kennedy Urlacher. I just feel like somebody will, but I just can't put my finger yet on who that's going to be. The next level, linebacker. I mean, we could see Drake Bowen get a breakout. I mean, he could improve, but I don't know that I'd call it a breakout because I think he was pretty good this year. Maybe reputation-wise, he has a breakout, but as far as level of play and playmaking, the first guy at linebacker, it's really two guys, but I'll talk about one first that I see being a big-time breakout because I think he's going to start next year is Kingston. I think you're going to see a lot of Kingston and Drake Bowen playing side by side next year. And now the staff could have, Jaden Ausberry maybe be that starter. And then that way Kingston can be a swing between the two spots. We saw that with Tavon Coney in 2017, where he actually got more snaps, I believe, but he didn't technically always start because he would play both Mike and Will. Could maybe see that a little bit. But I think Kingston's going to have a big jump in opportunities, and then that's also going to make a big jump in production. He had a good freshman year. I know a couple sites had him as a freshman All-American this past season, so obviously the production was already still pretty good. Finished his year with 37 tackles, only 9 solos, 28 assisted tackles, did have an interception, had 2.5 tackles for loss, 1 sack. He was a good player this year production-wise, but he wasn't like Manti was as a freshman or like Jalen Smith was as a freshman. I think next year he makes a big jump. I think next year he's a 70-plus tackle guy, 6, 7, 8 tackles for loss, 2, 3 sacks, and becomes a difference maker in this defense. And the only reason I don't give him more production is because I still fully expect them to have a very heavy rotation next season at linebacker. I don't think you're going to see 2 guys dominate the reps the way that JD and Maris did in 2023. There's just too much talent there not to play. And if you're trying to play 16 games, there's no reason not to play all of them because they're all playmakers. But so that's Kingston number 1. But I also think Jaden Ausberry has a breakout next year too. I think another year in the strength program, I think he's going to play even more. Like, I don't think Jack Kaiser's snaps are all going to get eaten up by Kingston and a freshman. I think some of his snaps are going to also go to Jaden Ausberry. And he was already a really impactful player on a per-snap basis this past season. I think his production goes up even more next year. As I said, he was second on the team in tackles for loss this season, despite ranking 11th on the team in snaps, on the defense in snaps. That's pretty good production, I'd say, Trevor. When you're 11th on the team in total snaps, but yet you're number 2 on the team in disruptive plays behind the line of scrimmage.
Yeah, that's pretty decent.
It's pretty good. That's pretty good.
Yeah, for linebacker for me, Kingston was definitely one of mine. The other one that I had was Jalen Sneed, because what he showed me towards the tail end of the season is that he is somebody that is starting to work on his craft a little bit more. The game is now starting to become a lot more familiar to him. Like, he's becoming a better football player. The athleticism, the length, the speed, that was always there. But what he showed me in the postseason, I think, sets him up for a breakout season in 2025 because I think of the early play against Georgia that he had, really his play throughout, which was really impressive to me. So it's weird to talk about like a player going into his senior season to have a breakout, but I think Jalen Sneed is poised for it. I think there's a lot of talk about the young talent in the room, rightfully so. But I do think that Jalen Sneed could have a breakout performance and build on what he did.
I think if Jalen Sneed's role doesn't change at all, and his volume of snaps doesn't change much, and this year he was 13th on the defense in total snaps. Let's say he doesn't get a whole lot more. I still could see him having a big jump in production because of what you mentioned, but especially on third down. I could see him being one of the biggest beneficiaries of some of the personnel changes we might see this year because there's no Mills, there's no Cross, and guys like that. Especially if Kingston becomes more of an every down linebacker, I could see Jalen getting even more of those third down snaps and becoming more of a force there. I mean, he only had on the season, looking at his numbers, Jalen Sneed was, he was 9th on the team in total pass rush opportunities. He was 7th on the team in total pressures, and he was tied for 2nd on hits on the quarterback. So, like, his ability to get to the quarterback and make a hit on a per snap basis was as good, if not better, than anybody else in the defense. When you look at it from a volume, like a per snap basis, volume basis, as I mentioned, he was 7th on the team in total pressures. Now, he was only 3 behind the guy that was number 4, and he had 107 pass rush snaps. The guy ahead of him had 229. The guy 1 spot ahead of him, Bryce Young, had 1 more total pressure than Jalen Sneed, and he had 101 more pass rush opportunities, according to Pro Football Focus. So again, on a per snap basis, there's nobody on the defense that can come anywhere close to what Jalen Sneed did this year on a per snap basis, outside of Drake Bowen. Because Drake Bowen only had 1 fewer pressure than Jalen Sneed, and he did that on 38 fewer pressures, but it's a different type of pressure. He's blitzing where Jalen is. I'm more referring to like being able to be that disruptive edge rusher.
Sure.
That's where I could see him having that breakout. So Trev, I look at that. I think that's an area where I think he could end up being a really impactful player in that regard. Anybody else at linebacker you see kind of having that kind of breakout season? You know, I mentioned Kingston and Jaden. You push back on either one of those or
no? Anybody?
I mean, we could talk about Madden Faramo, but that wouldn't be as much of a breakout as it would be sort of like a freshman type of impact type season. But I feel like there's some linebackers who maybe could, but I don't know if it's at linebacker. Like I can see Preston Zinner moving over to tight end and making his presence felt and being a bit of a breakout in a role player type of situation, but I don't know how much he's going to play at linebacker. And I don't see Bodie Cahoon with the time he's going to miss, being that guy. Maybe next year if some guys leave, go pro or something like that. But yeah, I think the top 4 is going to eat up a lot of those snaps. And the only person that I think has a chance to really push into that would be Madden.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I mean, it sounds like you and I are in the same opinion on Drake Bowen and the 3 other guys that we listed in Sneed, Osbury, and Kingston. Those are just the ones that would make the most sense for a breakout, right? Not saying that a guy like Madden or Teddy Rizak or Bodie Cahoon, they couldn't, but to me, I look at it in the same, right? Of like, if we're going to kind of leave Madden out from like just going from no production to having some sort of production in 2025 as a breakout, then you could have the same argument for a Teddy Rizak, a Bodie Cahoon, a Preston Zinner, guys like that. But I wouldn't be shocked. You know what I'm saying? If it was anybody, it's just, I think it's a testament to how loaded that room is with talent. Now, sticking along kind of the trend here, we were talking about Jalen Sneed and pass rushing. Getting to the defensive line here, Brian, breakouts for them. When you go through and you look, and I think we're going to be on the same page here. For me, the first guy was, again, health was in question, right? But I think Boubacar Traore is poised to have a breakout season along the defensive line. The tools that he has coming back. Now, obviously, health is always going to be the question. Can he come back and be what he was and kind of pick up where he left off prior to the injury? You never know, right? There are examples of it working out. There's examples of it not, sometimes even within Notre Dame. But to me, I think you have to start with Boubacar Traore. What say you, Brian?
Yeah, I'm there, but I'm hesitant to jump fully on board as far as expecting it to happen. It's certainly possible. I mean, he was already on the verge of that last season. And we talk about, some of the pressures and different things that we saw this season. I mean, Boubacar had 9 pressures last season in only 5 games. He only had 64 total pass rush opportunities. So if you look at the number of pressures on a per snap basis and you multiply that out, let's go to the entire defense and take like a RJ Oben type of player. Let me go here. So Boubacar had 68. What did I say? 68 total pass rush opportunities last season. 64. And you just give him as many as RJ Oben had, he would have had 27 pressures last season, which would have been second on the defense behind only Riley Mills. If you would have given him, let's say, all right, let's go say 9, right? And give him the same number of, let me go down here to 2023 and give him the same number of pass rush opportunities that Javonte Jean-Baptiste had. He would have had 43 pressures compared to 38 from Javonte. Now, here's the other part that I find that I always look at, because, it's not just pressures. It's like, are you getting to the quarterback, or are you just kind of, you're just kind of, yeah, you're getting a hurry, but you're not necessarily making the impactful plays, right? So if you give him the same number of snap opportunities that let's see here, RJ, actually, let's go Bryce Young, because he was the starter. So let's go Bryce. He would have had 16 hits plus sacks on the quarterback. That would have led the team. Riley Mills led the team with 13. If you would have given him the same number of hits on the quarterback on a per snap basis and say he had as many snaps as Riley Mills did, which is 291 pass rush snaps, he'd had 23 hits on the quarterback. For context purposes, Isaiah Foskey had the best season that Notre Dame has had in recent years as far as hits on the quarterback in the Marcus Freeman era. He had 15 in his back-to-back seasons. 15 hits on the quarterback. If you go back and look at the 2018 season, remember how good that was. Julian Aguara set the standard for hits on the quarterback. He had 21. Boubacar, and he did that on 314 snaps. So if you'd have taken his hit rate on the quarterback and give him as many snap opportunities as Julian Aguara had in 2018, he would have had 25 hits on the quarterback. Not pressures, hits on the quarterback. Julian had 21. And that's the best we've seen from a Notre Dame defensive player. That gives you an idea of the kind of pressure he was putting on players in those first 5 games. And he was starting to really heat up. He had 4 against Miami of Ohio, 2 sacks and a hit on the quarterback. He had 2 pressures and a half against Purdue, a sack and a hit, plus he had an interception. And then he got hurt early he only played 3 pass rush opportunities against Louisville before he got hurt. So that's why I say, like, when you talk about you earlier mentioned the numbers he had in a third, he didn't even really play that, because he only played 11 snaps in that 5th game. He didn't even play a third of the season. The production on a per snap basis is outstanding. Here's the concern. He's coming off a torn ACL. And guys, it's way better than it used to be, right? See, I'm saying that word way too much. But it's still, you'll sometimes see guys not quite be them full selves until the 2nd year. That's where with Boubacar, it becomes a bit of a question mark. Can we expect him to be as explosive that next year as he was this year? I don't know. I don't know how much we're going to see him in the spring. And so that's really my only hesitation there, is that. But if you were to tell me, Brian, I went into I hopped in the DeLorean and I went ahead to the end of the 2025 season, and I had 15 seconds of time there before I got brought back, and all I could do was pull up Pro Football Focus, and all I could tell is that he played the whole season, he had a normal number of snaps, and that his testing number showed that he was the same kind of athlete that he was last year. But I couldn't see what kind of production he had. I just said, oh, he's a monster. Like, I don't even see it that. If you tell me he's healthy all year, that he has a good offseason where his athleticism comes back just to what it was last year, not an ounce better, just what it was before the injury, he's going to be a monster. That's all I need to know. He'll be not only a breakout player for Notre Dame as far as production, he's going to become a breakout star. He'll have 10 plus sacks. I mean, that's the kind of pace he was on last season, in my opinion, Trevor, because remember, he didn't play as much like against Northern Illinois. He played 20 snaps against Northern Illinois, but only had 4 pass rush opportunities. He only had 11 pass rush opportunities against Northern Illinois. He had 20 against A&M, and he had 2 pressures. So the talent is there, and he had 8 run stops in that limited time as well. But you're talking about a guy, Trev, that finished 4th on the defense this year in sacks, and he played 4.5. Didn't even play 4.5 games.
That's so crazy.
He had 3 sacks, and you know what I mean, so 3 sacks divided by 4.5 times 16. He'd have had 11 sacks this year on just the rate he was at to start the season. That's assuming he doesn't get any better as the season goes on. And as we saw last year, most of those young guys got better and better and better and better as the season went on. But again, I keep going back to all that sounds great, but will he be the same athlete? Will he have the same level of explosiveness, the same level of endurance after hurting his knee? That's always the great question that we don't know. Even with modern science being what it is, it's still a question mark.
Oh, man, it just leaves you wishing that he would have stayed healthy the entire season. But luckily for us,
we said it during the season, Trevor. If Boubacar doesn't get hurt and Riley Mills doesn't get hurt, we're having a much different discussion right now about Notre Dame 2025. If those two guys, I can't prove it to be true. So if anybody tells me I'm wrong, all right, whatever. It's an opinion. If Boubacar and Riley Mills don't get hurt, we're talking about what does the defense need to do for Notre Dame to repeat? That's the conversation we're having.
Yeah.
You give me an elite rusher up the middle, and then the kind of pass rusher that Boubacar, not what we thought he could be, but what he was before he got hurt. We're having a different conversation about how that season went. Very different conversation. It's, can Notre Dame win it again? That's what I can't wait till we actually have that conversation.
I was just about to say that.
But I think that's what we'd be talking about.
I was just about to say that. Yeah, man. I mean, it's the potential's there. And like I said, health is going to be the biggest question. Do you have any other breakouts along the defensive line?
Yeah. I have a lot of potential ones. I mean, I thought about going with Jared Dawson. I feel like somebody up the middle breaks out, but I'm just not ready to put my name on to who that would be. But the other one that I'm looking at, and here's the only question I have. I don't know if I want to go with one guy or if I want to go with a duo ends up being great. But I just feel like with Josh Burnham moving, I expect him to move back to end at some point in time between now and the season starting, which means him and Bryce Young will be that end duo. I don't know if it's going to be Josh has the breakout or Bryce has the breakout, or as a duo they have a breakout. But I think that end position is going to be a force in the defense next year. And just a huge jump in production next season. I mean, if you look at it this year, you had Josh Burnham got most of his production at the Viper position, right? So he had 2 sacks in the title game. That's the only 2 sacks he had all year. A lot of his tackles for loss were playing the Viper position. He had 1 tackle for loss playing the end position, and then he got hurt in game 2. And when he came back, they had to start playing him a lot at Viper, starting with Stanford because of the injuries that you had in multiple positions, right? So you have him coming back. You look at Bryce Young had 1.5 sacks last year. RJ Oben had 1. It's 2.5 sacks that you had from that position. And I think that is going to be way more next season. You look at tackles for loss. Bryce had 3. RJ Oben had 1.5. That's 4.5. I think you're going to triple both of those numbers at the very minimum. And so triple those numbers would be 3.5 tackles for loss. I think there's at least 12 to 15 by the end position. I think you're going to see at least 8 or 9 sacks from that end position next year. Now, if you think that sounds nuts, just keep in mind that Nana and Javonte Jean-Baptiste had 16 last year in 13 games, 16 tackles for loss, and they combined for 8 sacks. I think that's the bare minimum of what we see next year from the Burnham-Bryce Young duo. if that ends up where they move Josh. That's partly dependent on the health of Jordan Botelho and Boubacar Traore. But if they move them back over, I absolutely believe that the production at the very least will match what Javonte and Nana did 2 years ago. And that's without a doubt a breakout season. I just don't know. Is it going to be split between the two of them? Will one of them get the majority of that production? You know, if they get 17, will it be like 9 for BY and 8 for Josh? If they get 10 sacks, will it be like 6 for Bryce and 4 for Josh? Or is it like, 11 for Bryce or 11 for Josh and the other one gets 6 or 6? You know what I mean? That's the question. I don't know. And that's what I say. I just think it's more of that position is going to be outstanding next year, whether it's one guy breaking out or them as a duo breaking out.
When I go through and I start thinking about the breakouts, and Bryce Young is absolutely in that conversation. He could be one of mine. Josh Burnham taking that step into becoming a better pass rusher, extending the utility belt. That's all there too. My other one was, and you brought him up, was Jared Dawson. Is the one thing that I think that is kind of, I don't want to use the word glaring because that sounds aggressive, but if there is one issue that you point to in Notre Dame's D-line, is the biggest question mark is the interior, in my opinion, because at least with the edge, you have the length and the speed and the athleticism, and you have other proven guys who have shown in moments that they can. Not saying that the interior doesn't, right? But you go through and you break it down. Gabe Rubio wasn't healthy the first part of the season, had his moments, had a pretty good game against Georgia, probably his best in a Notre Dame uniform. Donovan Heinisch had good games against Florida State and Virginia. He had basically a game-ending sack against Georgia. But for me, when the bulk of the production comes against Florida State and Virginia, can that be replicated once you start playing a tougher schedule, right? Not to take away anything that he did, but like I said, he's just another one of the players that you kind of see have flashes, right? Jared Dawson, I think, comes in with the experience. Health is a little bit of a question with him. How many snaps is he going to play? Can he stay healthy down the stretch? But Jared Dawson, for me, is a potential breakout for what he brings. We already covered what his production numbers were. He's a more productive player on a per-snap basis than Howard Cross and Riley Mills. I think just in general, he was a more productive player than Howard Cross, like just looking at the numbers without factoring in per-snap basis. And then I think he was a more productive player on a per-snap basis than Riley Mills, if I'm remembering that correctly. It was a combination of one of those.
Yeah, he was better on a per-snap basis than both of them. But his raw numbers were not as good as Riley's.
Okay.
I think he had 6.5 tackles for loss. I'm pulling it up right now. He had 6.5 tackles for loss last year and 4 sacks. So let's see. Dawson had 6.5 tackles for loss and 4 sacks. Howard Cross had 5.5 tackles for loss and 4 sacks in 13 games. And Jared Dawson did that in 10 games. So, yeah, he was. Riley had 8.5 tackles for loss and 7.5 sacks. So he wasn't as good as Riley was last year. But as I pointed out, he had more tackles for loss and sacks the last 2 years, or the last 3 years, than Howard Cross had the last 3 years, or last 2 years, on 300 fewer snaps. Something like that, right? It was like, it's just like way better per snap production. Yeah. But that's a question, is can he play the volume of snaps that Howard and Riley played? That's part of it. I mean, part of being a good player is I can answer the bell twice as much as you can, or is his effectiveness come from being a limited player? Hey, look, I'm dominant, but you get me more than 25 snaps a game when I start to wear down. I mean, that's just true for some players. I don't know if that's true for Jared Dawson. I have no clue. Yeah. He's got a proving, and that's my only concern about a couple of the transfer guys, him being one, and then Jalen Stroman, is they're not guys that have necessarily been able to answer the bell week after week after week after week. And that's something they're going to have to show that they can do at Notre Dame.
The thing that I find interesting about the defensive line is it wouldn't surprise me if it was like 9 different people. You know what I'm saying? Like if we fast forward to the end of the 2025 season and we're sitting back and we're talking, it's like, man, I can't believe the breakout Armel Mukam had. Would it be surprising in that, like, it would be surprising if like a Bryce Young didn't have that elevated progression that we thought, or if Josh Burnham didn't, but it wouldn't surprise me if Armel Mukam had a breakout season either. You know what I mean? It wouldn't surprise me if Junior Tuihalamaka built on what he did in the postseason, especially in 2024, and that carried into 25. It's like, yo, can you believe the season that he had? It's like, yeah, I can, because we saw it, right? We saw it in big moments. We saw it against Georgia in the Sugar Bowl. So, yeah, I think that's what's interesting about the defensive line is the depth of talent is there. It's weird that they have almost the highest potential ceiling of the three position groups, but also with the most question marks. That's a weird line.
That's fair.
That's a weird line.
I mean, if you were to say everybody reaches their full potential next year, athletic, who are the 5 best players on defense?
Bryce Young, Boubacar Traore, Josh Burnham probably has to be in that conversation.
Leonard Moore.
Yeah, Leonard Moore.
And either one of the linebackers, Drake, Kingston, Jaden, or Christian Gray.
Yeah.
I mean.
Yeah. Maybe Adon, depending on what.
But like Adon is not quite the elite athlete that some of those other guys are.
True. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That's the and so like, but that's why I say, like, I guess maybe a better way of putting it would be like, who are your 5 best draft prospects? Because Xavier Watts is not one of your 2 or 3 highest draft prospects on your defense. Leonard Moore probably, with his talent, Boubacar. I mean, there's guys that have, high first round potential, which Notre Dame hasn't had in a while, where they haven't had a lot of guys that I think if he hits, he could be a first round draft pick. They haven't had a lot of those. They've had a lot of, there's a lot of 2nd to 4th round picks there, and that's what makes them good, because they're all that potential way.
Right.
It's just a lot of those guys with that upside have not come anywhere close to playing to that level. And that's all in the D line, where Leonard Moore's shown that. Adon has shown that. Xavier showed that. With the D line, it's like, yeah, there's a lot of potential. And he flashed we're talking about Boubacar. He was doing great, but could he have done that for another 11 games? We don't know the answer to that, because he never got that opportunity. And that's what makes the defensive line exciting in one breath, but then also a question mark in the other. Because there's, like, linebacker, to me, the only if at linebacker is health. The only if at cornerback is health. The only thing that's going to keep Adon Schuler from being a dude next year is health.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. The only thing that's going to keep the other safeties from just being good. Like, here's the thing. The combination of Jalen Stroman, Jadon Blair, Luke Talich, Bronte Johnson, Kennedy Urlacher, whoever of that duo steps up, I have zero doubt will be better than what was opposite Xavier in 2023. I don't think Adon has to be as good as Xavier was. I think there's some things Adon is never going to do as well as Xavier. I don't think Adon's ever going to have as much production on the ball as Xavier. But I think Adon also is a more impactful hitter and run defender even than Xavier was, especially as he gets older. I mean, Xavier's 3 seasons older than Adon. Let's not forget that. But like that opposite. So, but Adon doesn't have to be Xavier if the complementary pieces are better than what it was in 23. That's my point. I don't have any doubt that that'll happen. The big ifs are all up front for me. They're all up front. And that's both concerning, but also exciting.
Yep.
Because we're not asking any of them to reach their full potential of who they can be in their careers. Just be a somewhat pretty good version of what you can be at this point in your development. I don't need Bryce Young to be what he'll be as a senior. I just need Bryce Young to be the best version of what he can be as a sophomore. And if he can do that, that's really flipping good. Same with Boubacar, Burnham, all those guys. And I got one final sleeper breakout. If there are some injuries up front, I have a guy that could be that breakout if there's some injuries. And he could just end up breaking out anyway. I've talked about him before. When I watch Logan Thomas move around, I see a kid that moves. I'm big on this, Trev. When I'm watching this, I'm like, that's different than, look, I told you this before. I played against NFL players in high school, right? I've been doing this job a long time. I've seen what big time players look like. I knew what a big time receiver looked like from the time I was a freshman in high school. Why? Because I watched Plexico Burress destroy us when I was a freshman when I was at Kempsville. Then I watched us beat him and knock him out of the game the next year. I watched Deonda. I watched James Boyd. I got picked off by Dre Bly. I know what a pretty good cornerback looks like. You know what I mean? Because I thought I had one beat on a corner route, and then I realized he wasn't even running yet. You know, I've seen Ronald Curry in high school. I've seen Michael Vick in high school. I've been doing this job for a long time. You know when the great ones are in, the different athletes are in your presence. It took you 5 minutes to look at Aaron Lynch and Stephon Tuitt and be like, they don't have anybody on their football team that moves like this. It didn't take you long with Jalen Smith. It didn't take you long with Benjamin Morrison. It didn't take you long when you look at those elite players. You're just like I told you. Have you heard this story? We're in the first day of, I think it was spring or fall camp. I can't remember when Joe Walt showed up, but we're standing there up in the top of the indoor facility, and Vince goes, "Who's 76?" I'm like, "That's Joe Walt, the freshman." He goes, "That dude is one of the best looking athletes I've ever seen on the offensive line." Because he just moved different than everybody else. And so you just see it. And when I see Logan Thomas, I'm like, that dude moves different. You could see it with Boubacar. You could see it with Benjamin Morrison. I saw it this spring with Madden Faramo and Jadon Blair. I saw it with Kingston last year. There's just some guys, Trev, that when you look at them, you're like, that's different than what I'm used to seeing. And Logan Thomas has that. Now, I don't know if he's going to get the strength and all the technique and all this, but when I watch that kid play, I'm like, that's an explosiveness you just don't see very often. And so that's why I'm like, even if it's just as a third down specialist, I have a feeling that when you get a full year in the weight room and good health under his belt, Logan Thomas is going to be a force on the defense next year, even if it's just third down pass rusher. I just have a feeling that kid's going to do something next year.
Hey, man, that's what Notre Dame's defense didn't have this year. Consistently. Yeah. Consistency is the name of the game. And if Logan Thomas's breakout is they just kind of let him off the chain, this hypothetical chain on third down, and say, hey, Logan, go pin your ears back and go get after the quarterback. Yeah, that'd be a breakout. That'd be absolutely fantastic.
That's my sleeper.
Love it. All right, guys. Well, that's going to do it for our potential breakout players of the 2025 Notre Dame defense. But don't go anywhere. We have a mailbag section coming up next. We do it for about an hour. Obviously, all super chats get bumped up to the top, but make sure to get those submissions in, those questions answered, because Bryan will be here for about the next hour with me to go through the mailbag questions that you guys have. But before we get there, be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, and share this podcast with your friends and family. Whether you watch us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify Podcasts, please be sure to leave us a 5-star review. We'd greatly appreciate it. And as always, the best way to support what we do here is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com.
Dude, this sucks.
The cough?
Oh, man. It's killing me. It's at the point now where it's just reflexive. I'm not sick anymore. It's just I did so much damage to my throat that talking just like makes me just – so I apologize to everybody that I've had to cough as much as I do have today. But
get that tickle that just doesn't go away.
Oh, man.
It's the worst. Brutal. Dry coughs are terrible.
It is the worst. But I'm still here. I'm showed up. We're doing it. We're still doing it. So just pause for a second, Trev, and then we'll get to the mailbag. We can cut this part out when Vince is editing.
You got it.
I just had to complain for a minute.
Hey, you're good, man.
And apologize also that, man, this cough is absolutely crushing me right now. But I'm hoping I'm not sick anymore. I'm past the sickness. It's just, man, it's kicking my butt.
All right, Bryan, let's get into mailbag time. And, of course, you guys know the deal. Super chats get bumped up to the top. And we're going to be answering your guys' questions here for about the next hour or until we run out of questions here. So be sure to get your questions in if you have any. But we're going to get started here with some super chats.
We have one from Anthony Solomon. Anthony, thank you so much for your super chat. He just says, thanks for the show today, gentlemen. You are more than welcome, my man.
We have a super chat in here from Tom Connor, and he actually put in the correction in the chat a little bit after I went back and found
He did what now?
He went and put in the correction of the typo that he put in here, and I found it in the regular chat. Okay. I made a note of it, but it says, Bryan and Trev, I don't see a lot of elite offenses next year. Could defenses dictate who the best teams are in 2026? am I
Did he mean 2025?
Yeah.
Okay. No, I'm going to say no. And here's why I'm going to say no. Because I think we're going to see a group of teams that are still really good on defense. What's going to determine who the best team is next year is going to be very similar to what we saw this year. Why did Ohio State win the championship? Was their offense the best in the regular season? No, Notre Dame's was better than theirs in the regular season. It just was. They averaged more, points. They were better yards per play. They were just more balanced. But Ohio State's offense in the postseason was better than anybody else's offense.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what it comes down to. So, like, if you're going to have Tom, and I get where your head's at, Tom, and I think you're onto something, but here's why I'm taking a bit of the opposite approach is because you look at defenses and you say, okay, let's say Notre Dame's is every bit as good on defense next year as they were this year. I think Penn State's going to still be really good on defense next year, even though they lost some guys. I think Texas has a shot to be still really good on defense next season. I think Tennessee, we'll see how they're able to do. Tim Banks is going to lose some guys, but they've also recruited that position very well. I think Georgia has a chance to get better on defense next season. I think Alabama has a chance to get better on defense next season. Like there's going to still be a lot of those teams that are so really good on defense next season. What's going to determine who wins is which of those teams' offenses steps up and plays the best. And that's what it's going to boil down to. And so, Tennessee's defense is pretty good all year. They get to the postseason, they have a slightly off start, but their offense is just giving Ohio State the ball right back. And before you can blink, it's 21-0. And Oregon's defense was, kind of up and down all year. And then their offense has an off day, and then all of a sudden, boom, they're there. But like when the champion is going to be determined by the team who can play the best football on both sides of the ball.
Yep.
So if we think that there's going to be a lot of elite defenses or 6 or 7 or 8 elite defenses, the champion will be the team whose offense steps up and plays the best of all those teams. And that's going to be true for Ohio State. Like I had a buddy of mine yesterday who was like, he's like, man, Ohio State's in trouble, man. And I'm like, why is that? And he goes, they lose a lot off their defense. And I was like, Ohio State could struggle next year. I'm not predicting it, but they could. But brother, it's not going to be because of their defense. He's like, what do you mean they lose like 9 starters? And I'm like, yeah, they lose 9 starters. But then I walked him through and I was like, okay, they still have Caleb Downs coming back. They still have Sonny Styles coming back. That's a pretty good place to start. And I was like, they lose Cody Simon, good player, but Arvell Reese steps right into the lineup. He was really good in 300 snaps last season. It's kind of like with Kingston and, yeah, you lose Jack Kaiser, but you're going to be okay. Yeah, you lose JTT and you lose Jack Sawyer, but you're replacing them with this good player and that good player. You're losing these guys, you're replacing them with this good player. I'm like, look, with all due respect, I think Jermaine Matthews has a chance to be even better than Denzel Burke was.
Yeah.
I think he's a really good football player. I'm like, when you recruit like Ohio State does, the reality is you're going to reload on that side of the ball. My greater concern is more on offense. And where I don't know that they're replacing guys with the similar type of player. I don't know how good their offense is going to be next year, or offensive line is going to be next year. I know they're getting a couple portal guys, the kid from Rice, the kid from Minnesota. I'm not a huge fan of either of them, to be honest with you. They've got some young guys at tackle that can maybe play. You had some young guys play a lot this year with, at guard, like Luke Montgomery played and Austin Serveld played and Carson Hinsman will, maybe step in at center, but it wasn't a great line to begin with, and you're losing your better players from that line. Tight end, they're going to be really good. You look at wide receiver, they're going to be elite. Running back, they get the kid transferring in from West Virginia, the big boy, he's 6'2", 240. He's got like 1,400 career yards at least. And then, of course, you have James Peoples, who I liked a lot coming out of Texas as a good running back. Are they going to be as good as the kids had last year? No, they don't have to be if the line's good, because running backs, you don't need that. And then, Julian Sayin at quarterback, if he's the guy there, he's got talent. So it's like, if they're going to take a step back, it's going to be because their O-line and run game and quarterback aren't as good, not because they're going to lack guys on defense. Now, the hold yourself for a second there, Brian, comes from, I don't know who their D coordinator is going to be. I may change my mind if they go out and make a hire D coordinator. I'm like, I don't know why they hired that guy. I don't know who their O-line coach is going to be. As far as I've seen, I don't know that they've promoted anybody yet. I do believe that Brian Hartline, I thought I saw, or was that just some fake account? Is Brian Hartline going to be the OC, or is that a real thing? Or
there was one. It was like Buckeye scoop.
Okay, so it hasn't been like officially made.
No.
But like, yeah, we got to see who the hires are first before we dive too much into that. But anytime you have a major question mark on the offensive line, that's a concern for me.
Yeah.
But like, their defense is going to keep rolling. If their offense figures it out, then guess what? Ohio State's still going to be really flipping good again next year because their defense, in my opinion, is going to keep rolling, assuming they make a good D coordinator hire. So that's what it comes down to for me. Penn State's going to be really good on defense next year. How good's their offense going to be? That's going to determine. They're kind of the opposite of Ohio State. They're going to be loaded on the offensive line and running back. But the question, and I actually think they're going to be still pretty good at tight end. They won't be as good as with Tyler Warren, but they return some really good young players. Their question marks are receiver, and then can Drew Aller kind of, keep developing? Like, if you could put Ohio State and Penn State like an all-star unit team, so Penn State's O-line and running backs with Ohio State's tight end and receivers, and even with Drew Aller at quarterback, that's a pretty flipping good offense. You know what I mean? But they both have some of those question marks. Notre Dame's question marks are, you're going to have a first-time starter at quarterback. How's he going to be? Who's going to play where on the offensive line? There's also a lot of talent coming back. So they all these teams have question marks. Texas, look, everybody's excited about Arch Manning and how good he's going to be. And Arch is a good football player. Their offensive line's a bit of a question mark for me. They have some guys coming back, but we saw what that line looked like without Kelvin Banks. Well, guess what? Kelvin Banks is going to the NFL. I'm pretty sure he is. I thought I saw that he was going to the NFL. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong on that. But who's he throwing to? That's going to be a big question mark because Texas loses a lot of the receivers they had last year. So every team has question marks coming back on offense and defense. But if we assume that those teams are going to all be very good, then the question comes down to which offenses step up and play the best. That'll be what determines it. And that's what will determine it this year. And I think that's what's going to determine it next year. But to your point, I do agree that on paper, there's no elite offenses next year. It's who's going to be the best of that group. There's no Tennessee from 2022. There's no Bama 20, LSU 19, Ohio State 18, Clemson 18. Like, there's none of those units. Like, remember 18 in the playoff? You're like, Oklahoma's dropping 40 a game with Kyler Murray, and Clemson's dropping 40 a game with Trevor and Etienne, and you had Justin Ross and T. Higgins, and you're just like, good Lord. And then Bama's going for 40 a game with Tua and Devontae Smith and Jerry Jeudy and your Jalen Waddle, and you're just like, good Lord, these teams are unreal. I don't see any offenses that are going to sniff those teams next year, at least right now. That doesn't mean somebody doesn't emerge. I hope it's Notre Dame, but it's just right now we don't see that.
Right.
So it's okay, of the top teams, whose offense can step up and play the best. And that's where I like Notre Dame over a team like Georgia, because I don't have high expectations for Georgia's offense making some big jump next year, because they're still going to have the same personnel issues next year that they had this year. And that would be my concern if I'm Georgia.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I'm with you. Super chat from Michael S. Thank you for the super chat, Michael. After Alvarez left, Holtz never got a good defensive coordinator again. Do you have the same concern with Al Golden's departure, or was Holtz not concerned much with defensive coordinator hires? I mean, I don't know if you, and listen, some people can correct me if I'm wrong here, because I never had the pleasure of watching Lou Holtz coach at Notre Dame, good Lord. But I don't know if any head coach could be labeled as not concerned with a coordinator hire. That's just me. And I don't think that's Notre Dame specific. I don't think that's Lou Holtz specific. I find it hard to believe that any head coach, especially one as prominent as Lou Holtz, would just be like, I don't care who my defensive coordinator is. Now, I could be wrong. Like I said, I wasn't around to watch the seasons, but that's just my initial take.
Yeah, I don't obviously Holtz thought he was making good hires. I mean, he was in his prime. He hired Gary Darnell for a couple seasons, and then he replaced him with Rick Minner for a couple seasons. And then obviously he hired Bob Davie in 1994 to replace him. And I thought the Bob Davie hire was a good hire. Bob Davie was a good defensive coordinator. He just wasn't he wasn't a good head coach, but he was a good defensive coordinator. But I would say I would disagree with you on the premise of what you said. I think we as fans sometimes are way too black and white with success and failure. And it's like, if you're not Barry Alvarez, then you're not good. And I was having this conversation with somebody the other day about Jared Parker. I was like, Jared Parker's a bum. And I was like, I don't care what you think of Jared Parker as far as is he good, is he great, or whatever. But to call him a bum, you don't accidentally have the highest scoring offense in Notre Dame history by far if you're a bum.
Right.
And he was being a bit hyperbolic, but I was like, what we can all agree on is Jared Parker was not a championship caliber offensive coordinator. That's why they struggled. You and I were talking about this before the show, Trev. That's why they struggled in some of those bigger games.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, really struggled on offense in most of the bigger games. Even against NC State, they struggled up until Audric kind of had that breakout. And then they had the big play by Tobias and the big play by Tyree that were kind of – the play by Tyree was a busted play. The NC State turned them loose. And then you had 2 interceptions, one by Watts, one by DJ Brown, that kind of broke the game open late. It wasn't like a 45-24 butt whooping where you just dominated them for 4 quarters. I mean, it was a one-score game in the second half at one point in time. And then you kind of put the game away. Your offense didn't play great in that game outside of 3 big plays. That's really what you had. You had 3 big plays that really broke that thing open. And then you look at how they performed against Ohio State, Duke, Louisville. USC's defense wasn't any good. Clemson. Whenever they played like a good, talented defense, they struggled big time. But to call him a bum is just like, that's just kind of petty and childish and just like, you don't do what they did last year if he's a bum. What he wasn't was championship caliber. I think Gary Darnell and Rick Minner were both good defensive coordinators, but Notre Dame didn't need a good defensive coordinator. They needed an elite defensive coordinator, which is what they had in Barry Alvarez. And that's the difference. It's not, well, you have this and then you're just terrible. I mean, Rick Minner was the defensive coordinator in 1993. Yeah, he didn't call a very good game against Boston College, but he called a pretty darn good game against Florida State. I mean, they just – I just look at some of those things and I just think we're way too hyperbolic or way too black and white with good or bad. Lou Holtz never made a home run hire at defensive coordinator after Barry Alvarez. That's a fact. Will Marcus Freeman? I don't know. We're going to find out. The reason that I'm less concerned about it, not concerned about it, is because I kind of got to think that at some point in time, a defensive guy is going to make the right hire. I also think one giant difference is Lou Holtz didn't have the resources at Notre Dame back then to go out and buy whatever coordinator he wanted.
Yeah.
There were some guys that would have been willing to come play for him, coach for him, but Notre Dame at the time was not paying coaches very well. They were not amongst the top schools as far as will they pony up and go pay. If Jim Knowles wanted to come to Notre Dame, I have no doubt in my mind that Notre Dame would have met his salary demands. No doubt in my mind. He didn't want to come to Notre Dame. And I don't know how harshly Marcus Freeman pushed for him either. Just so we're clear. I'm not saying that Notre Dame went after him. I know there was conversations, but I don't know that Jim Knowles was like Marcus Freeman's like numero uno choice. And if we can get him, oh my goodness, let's open up the space in the trophy case and just get ready and polish it up and get ready for next year's championship trophy. I don't know that was the case. And I don't know that it wasn't. I'm just saying that's not the point. The point is what I know of Notre Dame right now, if he wanted to come and $3 million was the number, Notre Dame would have been like, let's make it work. That was not at all the case under Lou Holtz. So that also gives me pause that Marcus Freeman about having concerns about this. Even if Marcus Freeman gets this one wrong, that means Marcus Freeman will join the list of clubs that the club of coaches that has made a coaching a mistake. Do you know who else is in that club, Trevor? Every coach that's ever hired someone.
Every other coach ever.
It's what you do about it that separates you. Mm-hmm. And if he gets this one wrong, I promise you he won't get the next one wrong because that's just who he is. Marcus Freeman does not make back-to-back bad hires. I haven't seen it. You could argue that he made a bad hire, Jared Parker. Okay. Well, what did he do when he got after a year when he was gone? When I got Mike Denbrock. Chancey Stuckey was a bad hire. Who do you replace him with? Mike Brown. I think Mike Brown's a good football coach. We got to see if he can recruit at an elite level. But at the very least, Mike Brown's probably the best teacher of the receiver position Notre Dame's had in a long time.
Yeah.
I mean, he doesn't have a track record of making a lot of bad hires, and when he has, he's made up for them right away. He also knew right away that Jeff Quinn and Del Alexander aren't it. I worked with them for a year. They're not it. And that's why he didn't keep them on staff when he took over. So I'm not concerned about that because I don't think he'll settle for the defense not being great. And he'll have the resources to go out and buy whatever he needs to buy to fix that. And Lou Holtz never had that. So I'm not concerned about it.
Yeah, look, I mean, here's my 2 cents. And Brian hit on it a little bit, you just can't live in the world of extremes of if somebody's not elite, then they're terrible. Do I love Joe Rudolph? I think what he did this year with an injury-riddled room was admirable. Now, I will say some of it was I think some of the mistakes could have been avoided if the correct personnel group trotted out there on August 31st. It's just my 2 cents. But with that being said, I've had conversations with people similar to what Brian had about Jared Parker. People are like, well, he's not Harry Heedstand, so he's terrible. And it's like, so he's not the gold standard of offensive line coaches, so he's terrible. It's like, find the in-between. But Notre Dame is now at a level where they need to hire people to get them to championship caliber. That's a really good spot to be in. There are several universities that would love to have Joe Rudolph as their offensive line coach. You know what I mean? There's a reason why NFL teams called to interview him. Like that's my 2 cents. I'm not saying you have to love everything that they do. It's just find the in between they're the best ever and they're awful. Like there is a lot of gray.
Well, I think the Joe Rudolph example is a great one. I've been critical of Joe Rudolph when it's warranted, and I've praised him when it's warranted.
Yeah.
And I do think some of the issues we had this year were his decision-making, which was an issue last year. One of the questions that somebody brought up that I didn't start because I didn't quite know how he was trying to answer it was, what are these issues you speak of in the O-line room? And what I've reported apparently has been just kind of taken and run with, and people we advocating for. I've never advocated for anyone to be fired, and I haven't advocated for Joe Rudolph to be fired. What the problem is there's a lack of trust in the room, not because they think Joe Rudolph's a bad guy, because the communication sucks. He'll make decisions and not explain to people why. And it's not, and the problem that I have with that is I want my players to do what I tell them to do because I'm the coach. But if I'm simply the kind of coach who just says, do what I tell you to do, then you're a failure as a coach because I need you to understand why I want you to run the route this way. I need you to understand because it's built on how the defense is attacking you or what the route combination is or whatever the case may be. There needs to be an understanding of, hey, this is why I'm moving you around. This is what I need you to focus on. This is what I need you to do, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's why communication is very key, where you'll tell a guy, hey, you're my guy, you're my guy, you're my guy. And then day 3 of fall camp, you're second string and you're never on the first team again. Like that can't happen because then the whole room stops trusting you. That's the problem in that room. But I also had a person that I talked to, and I've talked to parents, I talked to players, I talked to people in the office. I've gotten this intel from a lot of different sources, and it's been consistent. But the other consistent that I hear from people time and time again is as much as the players have issues with the communication and the trust factor, the one thing that they all believe is he's a great teacher of the game of football, especially when it comes to the different aspects of run game. And so it's not a dislike of Joe Rudolph. It's in order for me to thrive, I need certain things. Thank you so much. I need certain level of trust. I need certain level of I need to know what my expectations are every day. And that stuff has to get better. We can talk about that, but also then say he does a lot of things well. But what it's turned into is when there's rumors that he's going to leave, it's like, good, they should fire him anyway. Like, hold on a second. Like, this is what drives me crazy is there's the people that want to defend everything he does. I've got this guy that emails me all the time with something else other people say about Joe. I'm like, dude, I don't care what this guy says about Chris Ash or whatever. Like, why would you want to subscribe to a site where I can just read one article that somebody else disagrees with? I'm like, oh, okay, I give up. I don't, everything that I believe based on all the games I've watched and the film I've studied and the people I've talked to out the window because this guy says he's okay. It's like, stop sending me this stuff. I don't need anyone else to tell me. I know what's going on. And I can look at that and say, this is really good. That's not real good. And what does that mean? Fix the stuff that's not real good. And then you can relish on the things that are really good. And that's why firing a guy is not always the case, especially someone who has had the success that Joe Rudolph has. He's got to get a lot better next year in a lot of different areas. Pass pro has been an issue for 2 years, including when they had Joe Walt and Blake Fisher. That's got to get fixed. But the automatic response should not be, well, he sucks. He's not Harry Heastan. He's not this. He's a good offensive line coach. Is he championship caliber? I have my questions. But that's the conversation that we need to be having here, not like he's not good. I don't think Lou Holtz hired a single bad defensive coordinator. He just didn't hire any championship caliber ones. That's the difference. And no, it was not the Spanky. That's not who I was talking to. That's not who's emailing me those things or am I having that conversation with. It was somebody else. But that's the thing is, Freeman needs to make, and that's our issue with Chris Ash. I don't think he's a bad defensive coordinator. I don't think he's a championship caliber defensive coordinator.
Sure.
And I know he won a championship, but it wasn't, in my opinion, because of him. It was because of Ezekiel Elliott, that offense, and he had crazy talent on that defense. That's the thing, championship caliber. And that's the difference between that and, to your point, Trev, bad. And we are way too in this world of debate where it's either I love you or I hate you. It's like if you're a fan of this other podcast, you have to hate us and our podcast. That's that's childish and petty. You can like ours and you can like theirs for different reasons. That's called being a grown-up.
Totally.
I can think that this guy's not as good as this guy. Like I have this, that's why I don't get involved in NBA debates anymore. Because I'll say, like, LeBron is overrated, and I don't think he's as good as Michael Jordan or Larry Bird. And then that is received by the person I talk to as, you think LeBron sucks? I'm like, no, I think LeBron's a Hall of Famer. He's one of the best players to ever play. I just don't think he's as good as those two guys. And then it becomes contentious. And it's like, what are we doing here? Larry Bird sucked. And hold on a second. You can think LeBron is better and not turn it into some of that nonsense. Like, that's what we do now. Instead of me arguing amongst two great things, I think this greatness was better than this greatness. It's like, let me tear down this guy or say that guy sucks. And it's so shallow and dumb and lazy and childish. It's like you're still debating like an eighth grader. It's like, well, you're fat. It's like, okay, I am fat, but I'm still right. And the fact that you had to resort to my weight tells me that you're wrong because I can lose weight tomorrow. You're still going to be an idiot. And so that's just what it's turned into, Trev. And it's like, we have to be able to have these conversations about this guy's good, but good is not good enough. That's the debate. Not does this guy suck or should you fire this guy? Absolutely. And I don't think anyone actually thinks Larry Bird sucks. It's just when you don't have an argument to make, that's what you go to. You go to the low-hanging fruit insults. Well, he wasn't as athletic, or he was this, or he was that, and it's childish. LeBron's a bum. Why is he a bum? He lost 6 NBA title championship. I'm like, that means he got to it 6 times.
Correct. Like,
you can't lose the NBA Finals if you never get there. It's like, oh, the Bills suck. No, the Bills were a great team. They just were never good enough to be the number one. I would much rather be the team that loses 4 games in a row or 4 years in a row in the Super Bowl than a team that never gets there. Like, who would you rather have been in the 80s? The Browns or the Broncos? Well, the Broncos kept losing in Super Bowls, but they also kept doing all those years? Beating the Browns.
Facts.
And that's where I just get so frustrated. And I'm not saying Michael S. is doing this. It just kind of led me into a bit of a tangent and a little bit of a rant about how we got to stop using these words as like just these really lazy ways of describing people. And when I talk about issues with Notre Dame, like Steve Angeli, I don't think Steve Angeli sucks. Anyone that says Steve Angeli sucks is out of their minds. My concern has always been he's not a championship quarterback. I've also said that I think if Rutgers or Syracuse could go get a Steve Angeli, you'd be nuts not to get him. But the standard for success for them is different than what it is for Notre Dame. Mm-hmm. Same thing with Chris Ash. I don't think Chris Ash was a good hire because my standard is championships. And I don't know that he's that. It's not, oh my God, it's Brian Van Gorder all over again. And the fact that some people immediately go to that is exactly what I'm talking about. You went to the worst defensive coordinator Notre Dame has had in 50 years or in 46 years of my life. Every time they make a bad hire, is he Van Gorder? No. There will be no one that Marcus Freeman hires as bad as Brian Van Gorder. No one. But that's not the standard. The standard isn't being better than Brian Van Gorder. Standard is, are you better than coaches who are good, but you need to be elite because you're trying to win a championship. That's the difference. And that's where the conversation needs to be, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Question in here from Mark Avalone. With revenue sharing going beyond football, how do you see the football GM roles interacting with other sports? Could its duties be to recruiting and NIL in multiple sports, or does the athletic director handle that role?
That's more of an AD administrative role. And until you have someone like this is why I say the GM role will never be quite like it is in the NFL, because in the NFL, the AD is basically the GM, essentially. I mean, as far as those type of duties, you're more like the director of player personnel in the NFL, where at the end of the day, the AD is still going to tell you this is what we're doing. And so I think it'll be more like that. So I don't think it'll be similar to football in the NFL in that regard. I think it's going to be very much football oriented, and then you still have a boss to answer to.
Yep. Question from Jim Halloran. Do you switch Gray and Leonard from field and boundary?
No, you want your best man guy to be playing in the boundary. And I think Leonard Moore could absolutely play the field. And I think that Christian Gray might be better in the boundary than next year than he was in the field this year. But I don't think that gives you your best combination. I think your best combination is still Leonard Moore in the boundary and Christian Gray in the field. If they wanted to make that change, that's fine. I think Leonard Moore could dominate anywhere. But I still think right now Leonard Moore has proven he's your best corner. Yeah. And if you're going to still run the same coverage structure you've been doing with a lot of man on the outside, you still want your best corner being in the boundary, because that's where other teams are going to put their best receiver. And so I wouldn't change it. I wouldn't, like, if they decided they wanted to flip it to let, because Christian's more comfortable there in the boundary and Leonard's a stud anywhere, that's fine. If Mike Mickens made that decision, I would trust Mike Mickens to make that decision. Totally. It's just, I think that keeping Leonard Moore where he is, just get Christian better. But if they decided to go a different direction, fine. That's fine. Because as we saw against Louisville, Leonard Moore is pretty good. But remember, what's the one game Leonard Moore gave up a couple deep balls? Yeah. It was the Louisville game. Yeah, when he played field. Well, it was his first start. Yeah, but he was playing field. There's so much more room to cover to the field. Mm-hmm. That's the point. You can't run the kind of route in the boundary against Leonard Moore the way that you ran it against Christian Gray to the field like Ohio State did. There's just not enough room to work. And that's what makes that field spot a little bit more challenging in that regard. Now, the boundary can be more challenging because a lot of times you're going up against the best receiver. One thing that I will say that Notre Dame is going to have to consider is teams are doing more and more and more moving receivers around. And they're going to have to understand that, like, this whole you're in the boundary because the best receiver usually plays in the boundary. That's not as true, especially with some of the best teams. And you may want to consider having the ability to maybe go more left-right, maybe do more matchup stuff. It's something to at least consider now that you're older. I don't know that they will, but it's something that I would at least consider. Because if I'm a team like Ohio State, where I have the kind of personnel they had, you better believe I'm not going to just put Jeremiah Smith into the boundary all day. I mean, you've heard me talk about that, and that's something I thought Mike Denbrock did a great job of. We have a question about that, so I won't get into that too much. I thought Mike Denbrock did a great job of that at LSU. And I think we're seeing more and more of that right now, Trev.
Yeah, defenses just have to have a counter. You just have to have a counter for it. Can't just be, well, if they line up Jeremiah Smith in the slot, good luck, Jordan Clark. He only has 6 inches on you. You know what I mean? So it's just, there has to be some sort of counter. And I'm not saying if you go and you play an elite level defense, you just shadow Leonard Moore or you shadow Christian Gray over their number 1, number 2. But there has to be some sort of counter. Has to be. So, but in pertains to this question, if I'm being 100% honest, I'm kind of impartial. I think either player could succeed in either role. I'm just more of, Moore worked really well in the boundary this past season. Mm-hmm. So why remove him? But if Coach Mickens sees it to be fit, then he has absolutely earned my trust of,
Right.
okay, well, this is happening for a reason. So,
Right.
yep.
I want to push back on something. And again, I think people don't understand what this means. Werewolf says, I think Chris Ash, should be considered a national championship coach because he has one. Yeah, he might have had great players on both sides of the ball at OSU, but ND does too. You're completely missing the point. Because as I said yesterday, if Notre Dame gives up 22 points a game next year, which is what Ohio State gave up in 2014, they're not sniffing the national championship. They're not coming close to sniffing the national championship. But to simply say he was on a team that won it is very. I don't read. Shallow is not the right word. Surface level. It's a surface level argument because then I would say, okay, so would you be okay if Marcus Freeman hired Zach Smith to coach the receivers next year? Would you be okay if he brought in Tim Beck to be the co-offensive coordinator next year? You know, like that. I mean, those guys were on that 2014 staff and the 2015 staff that was so good. You know, no, you wouldn't because, yes, they were on those staffs, but that doesn't mean that they were championship caliber coaches. Actually, Tim Beck was the next year. Tom Herman was on that staff, but Zach Smith was on there. Would you want Tim Hinton as a full-time coach? Because Tim Hinton was a full-time coach on that coaching staff. Tim Hinton was their tight ends and fullbacks coach. Would you want him to be that? I don't think that you would. Because it's not about you were part of a championship team. It's about, are you the driving force behind the championship? That's the difference. And that's what people have to understand. It's, again, this isn't saying he's a bad coach. He was not the driving force behind Ohio State's 2014 championship run. And I mean, the just look at how the season played out. I mean, they got shredded by Virginia Tech early in the season. They gave up 28 to Cincinnati, 24 to Maryland, 37 to Michigan State, 24 to Minnesota, 27 to Indiana, 28 to Michigan. They had played great against Wisconsin, but then they gave up 35 points to Bama. They did a pretty good – one of the best games they had all year, as I've said before, was in the title game against Oregon. But, like, they got ripped up by Blake Sims in the championship game. I mean, they were a dumb play call by Lane Kiffin away from Alabama running them off the field early that game. People forget that. Like, Alabama was on the verge of destroy, kind of like the Notre Dame game this year, except Ohio State turned it around much quicker than Notre Dame did. But Alabama had a pretty big lead on Ohio State early in that 14 game. And then Ohio State came roaring back and had a great comeback. Don't get me wrong. They had a great comeback. But Bama was up in that game 21-6, and they were driving. And let me pull this up. It was 21-6, and they were, let's see here. They gave up a touchdown. Let me find it here real quick. They had something that happened. I remember they were up, and they had a big mistake that kept them from really taking that game away. And then, of course, Ohio State rolls in the second half. But the defense for Ohio State did not play well that game. They won that game because Ezekiel Elliott just took that game over. And that was the difference. And that's what I'm saying. He's a good coach, but are you winning that championship because of the job he did? No, you're not. There's a lot of defensive coordinators that could have taken that team and had that type of production in those type of big games. Like, is Notre Dame going to win a championship next year if they're giving up 35 points in the semifinals, 28 points in the regular season? Think about this. 35, 28, 24, 24, 37, 24, 27, 28 in the regular season. Is Notre Dame is Notre Dame in the postseason next year if they give up those type of numbers on defense? No, they're not, because you can't expect them to score at the level that Ohio State scored in at times that year. And that's the whole point. Right? Now, I'm not saying he's going to do that because he was trying to fix a defense that was broken. And Everett Withers was not a good defensive coordinator. He had things to fix. He's not having to fix something that was broken at Notre Dame. He's in it's not broken, so don't break it. It's a completely different situation. But that's what I'm saying is I don't know that he's not I don't know if he's a championship caliber coach. I didn't say he's not. I said I don't know, because outside that one season, I don't know that we've seen a lot of years where his defenses were elite. We've seen one, and it was 2015. And that year they weren't not a championship. And here's the counter. Their 15 team did not win a championship because of their defense. That was more of an offensive issue in 2015 with Tim Beck and Ed Warner. Their defense was much better that next year. Still not great, but much better that next year. The only game they lost in the regular season, Trevor, they gave up 17 points to Michigan State at home. That should be enough to win you a football game, right? It was the offensives the next year. What I'm saying is I don't know that he's a championship caliber coach. That's the question. I have some doubts about it. I'm not saying he isn't, but just being on an offense, being on a championship staff doesn't make you that. Like, should Notre Dame, if, and I don't mean any disrespect to Zach Smith, I'm not trying to get into that, but like, does anyone think that if Lance Taylor, if Dylan McCullough and Mike Brown leave, that Marcus Freeman should go hire Zach Smith and Tim Hinton to replace them? Well, hold on. They were assistant coaches on that 2014 team that won the title, and isn't just being on a staff make you a championship caliber coach? Of course not. It's, were you the driving force behind it? Was there a level of consistency to what you've done? Like, does anyone think that Ed Orgeron's an elite coach? He won a championship. No, because there was no consistency to what he did. He just happened to have that magical run. And that's not what Notre Dame needs. Now, Chris Ash may end up being that. He may end up being that great coach. What I'm simply saying is there's a lot of concerns I have about whether or not he is or isn't. And I hope that Marcus Freeman is correct, that he is. That's my hope. But there's no evidence of that, right? So, and just because Marcus Freeman hired him does not mean he's right. Guys, we're not members of a cult. We don't just blindly believe everything that you tell us is right and perfect and righteous. There's only been one person on the planet that's ever only been that way, and it ain't Marcus Freeman, and it isn't me, right? Marcus Freeman can make mistakes just like we all can. And just because he made that hire doesn't mean that he is always correct. He would tell you that he's had hires that weren't as good as he hoped they would be. It's just, you hope that this one is right. And we'll find out. And I hope that Marcus Freeman is right and Chris Ash is a championship caliber coach. I'm just saying him being on a championship team is not evidence. I need to see patterns. I need to see consistency of excellence. And the reality is he hasn't been a part of a good defense in a decade. The NFL teams he were part of sucked. The last college team he coached on was terrible. His time as a head coach was not good. I don't care about that. But like, Al Golden was coming off of a year where they were in the Super Bowl and had a pretty darn good defense. There's a difference. That's all I'm saying. It's a question mark. And anyone being objective should be able to say, yeah, I don't see the track record here that gives me confidence that he's going to be good, but I am going to trust Coach Freeman. That's okay. I'm totally fine with that. But to just say, Marcus hired him, Marcus is God, he never makes mistakes, so this must be good, and if you don't agree, you're a hater, that's cultish. Just say, hey, I don't know. I don't know football. I'm just a fan. I trust Coach Freeman. I'm totally fine with that. Totally fine with that. But then don't push back on a point that I'm making if you don't have a counter argument other than Marcus hired him. I need something more than that. Give me a reason why. And that's my concern. I hope that Coach Freeman is correct. Mm-hmm. And if he is successful, I don't say, well, I was wrong. I'm not saying he isn't. I'm saying I have major questions if he is. And if he is, then we're all going to be excited. So let's just make sure we understand what this means, what we're talking about here.
Super chat from Michael S. Thank you, Michael. Ash and Mickens are both backfield coaches. Golden was a front man. How will responsibility be divided, and who is overseeing the front?
Well, the same guy that's been overseeing the front, it was Al Washington.
Yeah.
I mean, Al Washington was the D-line coach. Al Golden just oversaw the whole thing. Trust me, when you've been coaching as long as Al Golden has, he has opinions on every part of the defense. He just was smart enough to give certain people more responsibility. And I will say, nobody on the staff had as much responsibility as Mike Mickens. My concern is, Michael, you're not completely off here because now your D coordinator and your top lieutenant are both secondary guys. That's a valid concern that I have, about how the front seven operation will go, where Al Golden had a lot more to say about that. Al Golden was very involved in making sure that the D-line was being coached a certain way. Is Chris Ash going to have that same responsibility? I don't know. Does he have those same opinions? I don't know. Just because he's only coached secondary doesn't mean he doesn't know how to coach D-line. He's been around college football a long time. He's been coaching defense a long time. I'm sure he has an idea of how he wants D-line play to go. But it'll just be the same guy that we've had, which is Al Washington.
Question here from Luke Breeding. Can I get a quick rundown of what cover 4 quarters is? I mean, simply put, Luke, I mean, and I'm sure Brian will give a much more in-depth answer. High level quarters, cover 4 is they split the field into 4 different segments. I mean, if you look at a football field, just like you would a flat sheet of paper, and you draw 4 equal quadrants in it, that's cover 4. It like in the back end of the defense. Linebackers have other responsibilities, but that is the quickest way that I can explain what cover 4 is.
Yeah, and there's, I mean, that is definitely football 101, Trev, and essentially that's it. Quick rundown, it's quarters. Now, how that carries out is different. So, like, if a certain route goes to the post, it's not all of a sudden the safety goes up underneath the post. So it's like, you know, the corner will always be the outside post guy, you know, unless he's threatened, and by number 2, and then if number 2 threatens him, and then the safety then takes. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to do it. Some teams play a more aggressive quarters coverage, and their safeties kind of come down more, and their corners tend to be more post player. Some teams play a little bit more of a softer cover 4, where there may be more of sort of the safeties coming down. You can turn that into a lot of teams won't even run traditional quarters. It almost turns into like a pattern match type of quarters coverage, where, you know, it turns into man once guys have declared routes and things like that. There's a lot of variations to it. But to Trevor's points, essentially, you're responsible for a quarter of the field, and then the linebackers play the underneath zones. But like anything else, there's different types of cover 2. There's cover 2 man, there's soft cover 2, there's really aggressive cover 2, there's cover 2 Tampa coverage, which is very different. It's a lot of different things. I personally like the quarters coverage that is more aggressive, that allows the safeties to kind of come down and play the alleys a little bit more. Yeah. I think in today's era, it's very difficult to defend the perimeter pass and perimeter run if you're playing a true old school quarters coverage where you're just a little bit off. You better have some freaking elite linebackers in that case. And so I just think it's a different game. You can't play quarters the same way you used to. And a lot of teams will play quarters to a side. Now, I know that sounds like, well, how can you do that? Because one side is being broken into a half. You know, you maybe get like 2 to the boundary, quarters to the field, you know, like a combo coverage. I've seen, you know, 2 to the field, quarters to the boundary, because you want that safety to be more of an alley player, and then the cornerback boundary can play the post. And there's different ways I don't see as much cover 2 to the field with quarters, but I don't know that I've seen that, but like you can do that. A lot of teams do those more combo coverages now than what they used to. You don't see a lot of pure 3, pure 4, pure, you know, 2 as much as you used to. But that's essentially what quarters coverage is in its basic form.
Question from Henry Reese. Is the base defense for next year going to be a 4-3 or 4-2-5 under Chris Ash?
I'd be shocked if it's not a 4-2-5. Now, let's not forget that it wasn't that long ago, like Marcus Freeman actually was part of this as well, where it's a 4-2-5 out of 4-3 personnel. You can do that. And we saw that a lot with Jack Kaiser under Marcus Freeman. It was a 4-2-5 defense, but Jack Kaiser was part of your 5. We saw that under Mike Elko and Clark Lee, where they ran a 4-2-5 defense, but one of your 5 in 2017 was Drew Tranquil as the rover. He was a linebacker. It was 4-3 personnel. That's the question, is more of, are they going to go with a more 4-3 personnel defense or a 4-2-5 personnel? Like Al Golden was more of a 4-2-5 personnel guy. He wanted a nickel on the field a lot more. Are they going to go back to having like a Jaden Ausberry play more of that nickel role? That is the question. But it's still a 4-2-5 defense, because what differentiates that, Henry, is in a 4-3, your third linebacker tends to play a lot closer to the box. In a 4-2-5. A 4-2-5, he may be a Jaden Ausberry type of linebacker, but what he won't be is a Kingston Viliama-Asa and Drake Bowen type of linebacker. He won't be a Darren Lee type of linebacker, who was the 3 in Ohio State's. You know, they had Raekwon McMillan and Curtis Grant at Mike. You had Josh Perry at Will. You had Darren Lee at their Sam, and he would rush off the edge. He would drop into coverage, but he was not playing rover in the same way that Drew Tranquil was necessarily playing rover in 2017. And he definitely wasn't playing rover the way Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah was. I think that's still the ultimate ideal defense, is if you can find a rover like Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, that's still the ideal base defense. It's just hard to find guys like that. Guys like him and Isaiah Simmons don't come along very well. I know Isaiah Simmons didn't play that at Clemson, but he would have played that at Notre Dame, or could have played that at Notre Dame and been a dude playing rover at Notre Dame. What I'm saying is they're similar athletes. That long, rangy, safety-ish linebacker. There just aren't a lot of guys like that. And that's why you don't see that as much.
Yep. Question from PJC 1122. Who had the more impressive true freshman season at corner, Ben Morrison or Leonard Moore?
I don't know that I think they're similar. I think they're similar seasons. I mean, look, Benjamin had more interceptions. Leonard Moore had more pass breakups. Benjamin is more fundamentally sound. He was more technically sound. Leonard had to kind of get away with his speed being really good at times. That's the thing. I don't think people realize Leonard Moore still has a lot of room he can improve his technique.
Oh, yeah.
Which, like, oh, my goodness, like he could be way better. Way better.
I mean, they were great in their own right. I mean, Ben Morrison, I think people forget, like people think that the first time Ben Morrison touched the field was against Clemson in 2022, and it wasn't. Like
it was against Ohio State in the opener.
I think it took Ben Morrison a little bit longer of a time to kind of get up to speed, but then once he got there, he took off and ascended at an insane rate. I think Leonard Moore started relatively high, and so it's different. It is. I appreciate both. Not saying that you don't, PJ. It's just tough. I don't have a dog in this fight of who is the more impressive. Question from Christopher Galloway. What would your starting offensive line look like if you just went by body type?
Oh, God. I mean, that's easy.
Yeah.
I mean, if we're just going by body type, my starting lineup is Jagasaw and Lambert at tackle. It's Absher and Shrouth at guard, and it's Ashton Craig at center. I mean, that's going to give me a big, long, physical, movement-based offensive line that can move. And when I mean movement, I mean they're moving people, but it's also an athletic offensive line. You guys can get to the second level, rangy for pass pro. I mean, that's the thing about length, is it really helps you overcome some mistakes in pass pro. There are things there are things like I pointed out that one pass pro on the breakdown I did, Trev, where JTT gets up into Charles, he knocks him back initially, and Charles just plants his feet and stones him. Anthony Knapp doesn't have the girth to do that, no matter how much he wants to try. Charles can make up for mistakes with his length that Anthony couldn't. And that's just, there's nothing you can do about that. And so that's why I say, ideally, give me that lineup. That doesn't mean it's their best offensive line. And that's why I liked how he answered that. But body type wise, that's 3, 6, 7 guys. That's 3 guys over 320. My small guy is my 6'5", 308-pound center. That's my small guy. Like, yeah, I'll take that. That's a line I can deal with body type wise. That doesn't mean that Anthony Knapp won't be one of the best 5 next year. He may very well be. It's just, if it's about body type, that's my ideal lineup.
Yep.
Absolutely my ideal lineup.
There's some big dudes.
Yes, it is.
Jim Halloran asked, Notre Dame has never won a national championship without having an All-American defensive end. Who could be an All-American at defensive end for Notre Dame?
Well, let's be honest about something else, too. A lot of times you're not necessarily the best defensive end in the country. It's that you're an All-American because your team is really good. I mean, that's also part of the conversation. So I don't know that I would necessarily like if Notre Dame loses a couple games in 1988, is Frank Stamms an All-American? I believe Frank Stamms was their All-American that year, right? He was a second teamer. Or no, he was actually on the AP and the UPI. But is he that if Notre Dame loses to Miami and Michigan? I don't know that he is. So, I mean, some of that, and that's what one of the best things that Marcus Freeman says is, with team glory comes individual glory. It's absolutely in that order. Because, and I've pointed this out with like All-American lists. You've seen guys have great years, but they're at programs that nobody cares about, so they don't get the love that a guy who was less productive on a great team got. And I think that's absolutely true. But who could be an All-American DN for Notre Dame next year? I mean, that's a kind of easy answer. It could be Boubacar. It could be Bryce Young. It could maybe even be Josh Burnham. I mean, there's options for that position. I don't think it has to be a DN because let's not forget, Frank Stamms was technically a DN, but he was more of a 3-4 outside linebacker. I mean, they were a 3-4 team. It was a different defense. So, but I think there's candidates for, you need a defensive lineman is my point, to be an elite player. And I think there's certainly plenty of candidates for that.
Archer 452. Sorry if I missed it earlier, but please rank the defensive position groups by your confidence level right now. Here's mine: cornerback, linebacker, defensive end, safety, defensive tackle.
Mine is a lot different than that. I actually would, my first two, I'm on the same page with him. I just went and wrote those down. Looking at his cornerback and linebacker in that order, absolutely where I'm at. I would consider putting linebacker 1 because I have more faith in the depth at linebacker than I do cornerback right now. And I think you can make a case for linebacker being number 1. I don't know if you would make that case, but I'm 1-2 there. I'm actually third safety because I think Don Schuler is going to be a guy. I really like Jalen Stroman. I think there's a lot of really talented depth there. And I think the position coach that's going to be with those guys is the best in the business at what he does. Then I'm at D tackle just because the bodies, the proven nature of it. I'm least confident in the DN position right now than I am anything else, just because there's too many injuries there. There's a lot of youth there. There's just way, and it's what you said during the show, Trev, there's way too more question marks there than any other position group. So if we're just talking about confidence level, they're at the bottom of my list, even though they could end up being one of the 2 best position groups on the entire team. There's just, as we said, there's way too many ifs at that position that just don't exist at other positions. Yeah. And that to me ties right into what confidence level is.
Yeah, Archer, mine is linebacker, corner, safety, defensive tackle, defensive end. That is my rankings of confidence. So, yep. And I'm kind of in the same boat as Brian. I understand corner being first. I understand linebacker being first. So, yep. Chris W., who do you think the hype for Caleb Downs is? Oh, why do you think the hype for Caleb Downs is so much more than Xavier Watts? Just physical tools.
Oh, physical. Yeah. I mean, it's part of it. It's in those physical tools led to him being a higher ranked recruit coming out of high school. That's a big part of it. He's going to be likely projected as a higher draft pick. And let's not forget, Caleb Downs and Xavier Watts are the 2 best safeties in college football this year. There's no question. Xavier Watts is a 5th-year senior. Caleb Downs is a true sophomore. You can't ignore that. Now, in 2024, would I rather have Caleb Downs or Xavier Watts? I personally would rather have Xavier Watts. And I think the championship game kind of proved that. Caleb's a great player, but he got beat a couple times by some of Notre Dame's playmakers. He's a great player, and he's only going to get better. Xavier is as good as he was ever going to be in college. I mean, if he comes back next year, he's going to be what he was this year. There was room for him to get better this year compared to last year, and he made those improvements. Caleb's going to get better and better and better because he's just younger. There's a lot of things he can learn. So he's more powerful than Xavier. He's faster than Xavier, and he was a higher ranked recruit than Xavier. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. That's why I think he gets much more hype. And you know, and a lot, that's where a lot of the media stuff comes from. It's who was a highly ranked recruit. Like, why do you still hear people like Josh Pate talk about this season that LSU has more potential as a program than Notre Dame? Because he thinks they have more talent than Notre Dame. Why does he think that? Because he's basing it off of recruiting rankings, not who actually has better players.
Sure.
And so a lot of people still look at Xavier Watts like he was a 3-star recruit. You know, and it's just the reality of it.
I don't even think it's fair to look at recruiting. Xavier Watts came in as a wide receiver. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's just, look, to me, I think it boils down to early success. Like, Caleb Downs was a first-team All-American in the SEC, not like a true freshman All-American. Like, he was a first-team All-American in the SEC as a true freshman. And Xavier Watts wasn't. But I think, to answer your question, Chris, I think that's the reason for the hype is I think the media, the national media, it's easier for them to run and say, oh my goodness, look what this 18-year-old did, not, oh my goodness, look what this 22-year-old did, which I'm not saying I agree with it. I think that's the reason. Andre Tonsil, could Notre Dame have an All-American player in each position group on defense?
If you go with each position group and the broadest form possible, yes. Meaning D-line, linebacker, secondary. Absolutely. If you were to tell me corner, safety, linebacker, D-end, and D-tackle, way less likely.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you agree with that, Trevor, but I think if you look at it broadly, there's no question. I mean, you already have a preseason All-American in Leonard Moore. I could see a Don Schuler being an All-American next year. I could see Christian Gray stepping up as an All-American next year. I mean, would it shock you next year if Leonard Moore's a first-team All-American and Christian Gray's second or third-team All-American? It wouldn't shock me at all.
No, not in the slightest.
And a Don Schuler first or second-team All-American, I could see that, easily see that happening. Linebacker and defensive line, there's more projection, but the thing what's interesting is I actually think the linebacker's least likely because of how much they rotate guys. Because All-American lists are so much about production. Why did Xavier Watts not get unanimous this year when he got unanimous last year, when he was a way better player this year than he was last year? Because he didn't have 7 interceptions this year at the end of the regular season like he did last year.
Yeah.
And he didn't have 3 against, like the 2 big ones against USC on national TV and all that nonsense. Right? Like, that's the reason why. Was he a better player last year than this year? No. Malachi Starks was less effective this year than he was last year. Xavier's more, but yet the football writers who don't know much about football, they go by stats and narratives and all this. Not all of them. Some of them are really. Bill Bender's on that group, and he's very much a football guy and watches a bunch of football. But there's too many like that. I'll just say that. I won't put them all in one category. But that just look at narratives, look at SEC, and they don't actually watch film. They look at stats or whatever and do those type of things. And sometimes they're just people who are biased, because even if you look at numbers, I still don't know how you can make a case that Malachi Starks is better than Xavier Watts, unless you just want to look at like pure tackles, I guess. I don't freaking know. I don't know how you, honestly, I don't know how you can make that case. I really have no clue how you can make that case. But I think that's really what it boils down to. That is that right there. But
yeah, I mean,
it's because who's going to have 100 plus tackles or 12 tackles for loss or 5 picks or 8 sacks at linebacker? I with all those guys rotating, I don't know that anyone's going to do that. Defensive line, I can see Boubacar getting 12 sacks next year and being an All-American. I could see Jared Dawson. I mean, Howard Cross was an All-American 2 years ago with 7 tackles for loss and 2 sacks.
Yeah.
Riley Mills is an All-American this year with 8.5 tackles for loss. I could see that. The production was there. The big moments were there. Linebacker, it's kind of like they play so many guys that it's going to be hard for any one guy to have the kind of production that's going to warrant an All-American list when you're going against guys that have 120 tackles, 130 tackles, 13 tackles for loss, because they play 250 more snaps than you do. I think that's – but could I see Drake or Kingston or Osbury, one of those guys breaking out playing like an All-American? Wouldn't shock me the least. I just think that's the one where it's going to be tougher because of the numbers.
Yeah, I think Notre Dame could have multiple All-Americans on defense. I think they're all going to be in the secondary. If it's not for lack of potential, linebackers, for the reasons that you listed, they rotate a lot. For defense, it's just loaded. The D-line is just loaded with question marks. I think Boubacar could. I got to see him be healthy. I got to see him get back to that form. Bryce Young could. He's going to have to take a pretty big leap. It can't just be the traditional freshman year to sophomore year, in my opinion. Right. Jared Dawson, is he going to be able to play enough snaps to do that? Maybe. I hope so. So we'll see. I think there's a lot of questions. I think they all have the potential that they could, but I just think straight away Notre Dame will have multiple All-Americans next season on defense. I just think they'll all be in the secondary.
Mm-hmm. Agree. And then I believe this is the last question that we have.
All righty. Last question from Garrett Medford. With how much Denbrock utilizes the slot as a true downfield weapon, do you hope to see next year's offense use Fields, Greathouse, and Faison in the slot using pre-snap motion as much as I do?
I think so. I mean, Trev, I talked about this before the season. I did a breakdown on Irish Breakdown, statistical breakdown, where I talked about how there was so much parity and it's not parity, balance between the position groups of who was targeted, and between X, Z, and F being the slot. But it wasn't always the same guy. When you're tracking what Denbrock did at LSU, you couldn't just say, well, the slot got targeted a lot because Malik Neighbors had the most catches, and because he wasn't always making plays from the slot. He made more from the slot than he did outside compared to Brian Thomas. But I can show you 2 clips of Brian Thomas catching slot fades. I can show you Kyron Lacey catching slot fades. I can show you Chris Hilton catching slot fades that last year. And I think that's ultimately where Mike Denbrock would like to be, where you can have some of that flexibility. We just didn't see a lot of that this year, and I'm not quite sure why, but I would like to see more of that next year, where you don't always know where Malachi Fields is going to be. You don't always know where Jaden Greathouse is going to be. You have to be careful with that, because you can't move too many guys around if one of those guys is not good at one of those other positions. You have to be careful of that, unless you, hey, look, we know that, but on this particular play, we don't need him to be that good. He's just running the comeback because we're using this combination over here. That's fine. I would like to see more of that, and I do think we'll see more of that. The pre-snap motion, I don't always love the slot being the only guy that goes in motion. I mean, one thing that I think was one of Notre Dame's most effective motions this year is when the slot was on the line and they would motion the Z down and stack, or they would bring a guy across, and stack opposite. I think you have to be very versatile with your motions, and it's not always, because, like, look, anytime you do the same thing a lot, eventually it just becomes less effective because teams can have a plan for it.
Yeah.
And as I've said, that's one of the things that has hurt Navy a little bit in the past is, and why you see Navy and trying to adapt a little bit is because when you play the same teams over and over and over and over again, and you're just doing the same stuff, they can write a book on you. What helped Navy for so long when they were independent is they only played 3 teams every year: Notre Dame, Air Force, and Army. That's it. And then they'd play a bunch of different teams, and you wouldn't see the option maybe twice in a row and a home, and then you're not doing it anymore. But now you're getting them every year, and there's more of a book being written about their style, and that means they have to adjust. Well, there's only so many adjustments you can make in a triple option,
right?
Because you can't, you can't make too many adjustments with the backfield. You can't make too many adjustments, with the motions. You need slot guys. You need all those type of things, and so they've had to alter how they'd run the option and how they run their offense to be more versatile. And so you have to be careful that you're not doing the same thing over and over again. And that's something I think we'll see. But there's times when I want to see Jaden Greathouse moving around. There's times when I want Jaden Greathouse stationary, and Jordan Faison's the movement guy, or Malachi Fields is coming across in an unbalanced type of look, or even in a balanced type look where it's the tight ends on the line and Malachi's off and he motions over and he's the guy that's getting that look or running the wheel or whatever. To me, it's just I like versatility in how you go about teams. I don't want to always know where Malachi is. I don't want to always know where Jaden Greathouse is. I don't want to always know where Jeremiah Love is. I think that's where you can be most effective, really keeping defenses on their toes, is being creative with that, less creative with running a million plays, more creative with the different ways you get into those different plays and matchups and angles and leverage and things like that. Those are things I want to see. Like, you can run smash out of a balanced spread look, and then you can run it out of a stack look. And the stack look gives a whole different feel, but you got to run that smash different. You can run a wide hitch from a stack if you get a certain way. Sometimes you got to run like a pivot route and then run a corner behind it. Sometimes you run a burst corner and then a 5-yard out. You're doing it the same way, but depending on how you get to it, you're going to attack it differently. And that's, to me, what I've always seen you see the most success with is when teams go at you that way.
Yeah.
I just think it makes it a lot harder to defend in that case. It makes it a lot harder to, look, hey, if Jaden Greathouse is a dude every week next year, like he was in the playoffs this year, that's fine. But if you just line him up in the slot every time, it's going to be a lot easier for teams to kind of get a read on, okay, this is how we stop them. This is how we can get to him. This is how we can keep him in check is by doing this.
Well, the touchdown that he had against Penn State was when he started off in the Z and then motioned down, stacked behind Faison.
Right. And that's what put that guy in a tougher spot. So,
Yep.
we see those type of things. And I just think that's just the best way to go about it, in my opinion, is just to attack people that way. Somebody in the chat asked how many drops did Greathouse have last year? According to Pro Football Focus, 1. It was that
Illinois.
slot fade against Northern Illinois. That's the only drop he had all year, according to PFF. And he was targeted, 53 times. Dude, he was targeted only 53 times. Notre Dame completed 79.2% of their throws when he was targeted. This is why you and I kept saying he needs to be targeted more.
Targeted 3.3 times a game.
Yes.
That's atrocious. I'm sorry. That's just straight up what it is. I think it is a combination of Riley missing the spring and Mike Denbrock being a new offensive coordinator. I mean, it's no mystery to me that Sam Hartman had the spring to throw to Jaden Greathouse, and he had 4 touchdown catches in 3 games to start the season. Yeah. And then he had a quarterback that couldn't throw to him during the spring, and then for the entire duration. And here's the thing. He averaged 3.3 targets a game. People forget, that means he had to have gone games without targets.
Purdue.
If it's an average.
Yeah,
because
Purdue, he was at 0, 1 against Miami of Ohio, 1 against Virginia, 1 against Indiana.
Yeah.
And he had 1, 2, 3, 4 other games where he's only targeted twice.
I was about to say, because against Penn State, he had 7 targets.
And same against Ohio State. He caught 13 passes on 14 targets against Ohio State and Penn State combined. And if you talk about being a money player, throw Louisville and Texas A&M into that mix. I mean, think about it. What were the 4 most impactful games that he had this season? I think a strong case could be made that he was at his best as far as making an impact against A&M, Louisville, Penn State, and Ohio State. Matter of fact, I'm actually going to go do that math here real quick, Trevor. So for on the season, he had 42 catches for 592 yards on the season.
Yeah.
So let's take what I would say are the biggest games. I think A&M was not bigger than Indiana in regard to what's on the line, but I think it was a much bigger moment. Opener on the road, SEC school, et cetera, et cetera. Louisville was a huge game, highly ranked team, very important game. And in those 4 games, I mean, you want to throw Indiana in there, you can, but he played well there. He just wasn't targeted as much. But in those 4 games, which we would argue are 4 of the 5 biggest games of the year, because Georgia has to be in there too. He just wasn't targeted in that game. But in 4 of the 5 biggest games of the year, Jaden Greathouse was targeted 21 times, which is a good number. That's 5 a game.
Yeah.
He caught 20 passes on those 21 targets for 320 yards. And he had 4 touchdowns in those 4 games. Yeah. That's 16 yards a carry. And let's see here. In those same games, he was 4 for 5, 5 for 6 on contested throws. And let's see, of his 20 catches, 13 went for either a touchdown or a first down.
Over 53%, almost 54% of his yards came in 4 games. The biggest games.
And they were all big games. I mean, again, you could throw Georgia. Georgia needs to be in there because that was the other game that's on that level.
Yeah,
but that was a huge game. I mean, but he didn't get targeted in that game. They threw for 90 yards as a team. They weren't throwing the ball, but in 4 of the 5 games that they played, the biggest games they played this year, against, I would argue, 4 the 5 best teams, because I think Louisville's, with all due respect, I think Louisville's better than Indiana. I just do. I think they played a much tougher schedule, and they only lost to really good teams. That's debatable, but we know for a fact that 4 of the 5, if not 4 of the 6, you could even say that 4 of the 6 games where he was targeted, he was 20 of 21 for 320 yards and 4 touchdowns in those 5 games. That's really, really good, Trev. Really good. And it just backs up what you and I were saying all year, which is that guy flat out needed to get the ball more. Just absolutely needed to get the ball more.
Yeah, I mean, based on those numbers, that target number needs to go from whatever it was. What'd you say, 53?
53.
53 to 100, like legitimately.
At least
like,
75.
I mean,
at least 75. I mean, like if he catches, it'd be less egregious next year because you do have a Malachi Field.
Sure.
We didn't have this year. My thing is if you look at it and say, okay, so let's say he has 75 catches next year. All right. So, or 75 targets next year. What is, what would be 79.2? Like, what would be the number of catches he would have for it to be
75 targets? Probably like 62.
Yeah. Let me sure 60. If you're right on that, that's going to be really impressive. Let's see. It's a little bit high. Let's go 60. So let's go 59 divided by 75. That gets you to about so let's go 60. So let's go 59 just for argument's sake. And of those 75 targets, and he still has the same number of yards per catch. That's 59 catches for 832 yards. That's a pretty darn good season when you're going to have a weapon like Malachi Fields with you, healthy Jordan Faison. You know what I mean? Like 100 times, now he's getting like way heavier part of that. I think 75 minimum is more of a healthy, because we're also targeting a 15 plus game season. We're not talking about 75 and 13 games, 12 games. So he needs to be there, no question. But I think if you were to go look at this year's offense, the way it should have been, he should have been closer to 100 on this year's offense. No question.
Mm-hmm.
And because here's the thing, what we saw in the last two games, Trevor, is what you and I had been saying was there all year. It just
in the previous 14 games.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. No one on the planet outside of the Great House family enjoyed that game more than our guy Salty.
I was just about to say.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Yep. We did have one last question to bring up that just came up before we get out here.
Question from Sean Stewart. As far as the run game, since you are a former coach, what mentality did you want your offensive line playing with? As a former offensive lineman myself, I was enjoying moving someone against their will.
That has to be the mentality that you have. I mean, look, I'm one of my big beefs with offensive line coaches, Sean. I can't stand offensive line coaches that are about leverage and placement. And you see a lot of these like finesse offensive lines where it's like, just get this angle and hold your ground and the scheme will open up a running lane. I mean, I grew up in as a big fan of the Alex Gibbs, Mike Shanahan zone scheme. And they weren't big. They weren't like moving guys off the line, like just double teaming and knocking them 8 yards back, but they were going to ride you to the sideline, man, and open up that cutback lane. I mean, movement is the key. The whole point is getting movement. And their whole point of the defensive player is to not let you move them. There's this battle for the line of scrimmage, and whoever's going to win is the team that can reset the line of scrimmage in their favor. So if here's the line, and if the defense is either here or moving it back, they win. If you're the offense, you've got to move it forward to win. I don't think stalemating is a win for the defense in the run game. I just, more often than not, it's a win for the defense. Your goal as an offensive lineman is, I want you to be lower. I want you to be faster, getting into your technique, not necessarily athletically faster. I want you to be more physical, and I want you to be the finisher. Like, that is it to me. Finisher on a high school highlight tape means taking a guy 8 yards and putting him on the ground. Finisher in college could simply mean some of the blocks we saw this season where Anthony Knapp pushes a guy off the ball and then just seals the guy off, and Jeremiah Love goes right behind him for a 98-yard touchdown. That's a great finish. Now, he didn't take the guy 8 yards and put him on his back like Quentin Nelson. That's not what finishing is in college very often, not against good teams. Finishing is moving him out of the hole and keeping him there, setting that edge. And to me, movement is, if I can give Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price this big of a hole, they got a chance to go. But if I give them a hole this big, it's going to score. And that's the difference between doing your job and moving somebody. And that's what this line is capable of that. And it's really is, to what you're kind of saying, Sean, it is a mindset thing. Is you've got to practice every single day with the thought of, I got to whoop the man across from me. There's so many parts of football that it's not that anymore. Football used to always be, I got to whoop the man in front of me. Now with some of the stuff, it's just like, I got to be a fan. I got to make this move. I got to make that guy. And I got to, football, but in the run game, it's still old school, me against you, me and my boy against you and your boy. And we're going to knock you back. It's still in a lot of ways like sumo wrestling. I mean, you know what I mean? It really is, where it's, I got to get lower than you. I got to get my hands inside of you. I got to have the leverage. I got to drive my feet. I got to finish you off. And it's not always the biggest guy that wins. It's the guy that does those other things well. But it's a mindset thing. And Harry Hiestand understood it as a mindset thing. Why do you think the Notre Dame offensive line this year was more physical than last year? Do you think that Anthony Knapp and Emil Wagner are more physical than Joe Walt or Blake Fisher? Or did Joe Rudolph really focus on the mindset differently this year and focus on the technique that then goes into playing out that mindset? And that's why we saw a much more physical offensive line, despite it being inside the same guys we saw last year for the most part. And not as big or physical guys at tackle. It's the mindset this year was different. And that was one of the good things that came out of that Joe Rudolph did this year. Very different way of going about their business. Even the same guys. They would stop their feet. It was about leverage and all these other type of things. With Mike Denbrock and Joe Rudolph, they said, no, we're going to move people this year. It's not about gap schemes and creating lanes and all. We're going to move you against your will where you don't want to go, and then our backs are going to do something special. And that, to me, is still, at the end of the day, the mindset you need to have from your offensive line. And if you don't have that, you're not going to be a great offensive line.
It all comes down to mentality for me. I was never a coach, but I played, and that's what I wanted. Like, especially like at the level of high school that I played at, like we didn't have like 5-star caliber guys going anywhere. We didn't have a Owen Streebig, in high school. We didn't have a Tyler Merrill type of guy. So it was just, you have to believe that you're better than the person next to you. You have to believe that you're more aggressive than they are and that you want it more. That's what I love to see out of offensive linemen, personally. Now, it also helps when you have guys that are, like Quentin Nelson or a Joe Walt in high school. That would have been fun to run an offense behind. But
imagine if that line would have played with this year's mentality. Would have been a lot more fun.
Mm-hmm.
That'll do it for us, Trev. Why don't you take us out of here, man?
Yep, you got it, guys. Well, hey, thank you for the great submissions. Really good questions. Tomorrow we will be back here with a buy, sell, hold. And right now, currently at 1 o'clock, we will have a buy, sell, hold tomorrow. And right now, currently, IB Nation Sports Talk is going on. They're doing a mailbag, women's basketball mailbag. So be sure to head over there and check them out. But before you do, be sure to hit this like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this podcast with your friends and family. Whatever streaming platform you guys watch us on, whether it be Spotify podcast or Apple Podcasts, please be sure to leave us a 5-star review. We'd greatly appreciate it. And all the conversations that we're having today, all the great submissions that you had for questions during the mailbag are definitely going on. Conversations of those sorts are going on right now on the premium message boards. So be sure to check us out at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Until tomorrow at 1 p.m., that's Bryan. I'm Trevor. We'll see you back here very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.